When I came home after being away for a few months, I found out that the house I grew up in, the one filled with my childhood memories, was being sold. You told me I could do whatever I wanted, so I did, I thought. But if anyone has to take responsibility for this mess, it should be you. After all, it's your house, right? This wasn't just about money, it was my revenge, because they constantly looked down on me for being poor. My husband, Ken, and my mother-in-law, Lisa, sold the house behind my back while I was gone. They even broke a contract on purpose and laughed at me for having to pay the penalties since I technically owned the house. They didn't care about how their actions hurt me or my parents, who entrusted this house to us. I'll never forgive them for what they've done. Ken and I have been married for 10 years. We've known each other since we were kids and started dating young. I come from a well-off family, my parents own a business, and I've lived a comfortable life. Ken, on the other hand, grew up in a single-parent household and didn't have much money. Despite that, my parents and I loved Ken for his kind personality, and they even treated him like their own son. When my parents decided to retire, they moved into another house my father owned and let Ken and me live in their old house. They wanted to help us as much as they could. My father even planned to transfer the house's ownership to me. He told me, "We'll finalize the paperwork soon, and after that, you can do whatever you like with the house. Maybe you can sell it and use the money to move into a new place someday." The house was in great shape, but it was too big for Ken and me since we'd decided not to have children. I was grateful for my parents' generosity, and I slowly started preparing to sell the house, working with a real estate agent. But Ken wasn't supportive. "Ken, I told you to fill out this form. I need to submit it today," I reminded him. "Just do it yourself. You're always nagging me. It's not a big deal," he snapped. I couldn't help but think, where did the kind and thoughtful Ken I married go? Since we got married, Ken had become lazier, leaving me to handle everything. He even made me fill out important documents for him, and if I refused, it would cause problems. So, to keep the peace, I always gave in and did it myself. Maybe he kept treating me this way because I let him. We had decided to sell the house and had even picked a new one to move into, but as I dealt with Ken's growing laziness and disrespect, I started to wonder if staying married to him was the right choice. One day, I got a call saying my parents had been in a serious car accident. I rushed to the hospital to see them. Thankfully, they survived, but their injuries were severe. The doctors said they'd need about 6 months to recover, and someone would have to take care of them for at least 3 months. I'll ask Ken, I thought. I also decided to talk to my workplace about adjusting my schedule. "I'll be there to take care of you both," I promised my parents. When I asked my husband, Ken, if I could stay with my parents for an extended period to help them, he easily agreed. "It's okay, it's your thing," he said, but the way he said it felt indifferent, like he didn't care about my parents at all. Still, with his permission, I was free to focus on supporting them. But then another worry popped into my mind. Could Ken take care of himself while I was gone? He's completely hopeless when it comes to house chores. He might manage to feed himself, but washing clothes or remembering to take out the trash, forget it. I didn't want to come back to a house that looked like a garbage dump, so I decided to ask my mother-in-law, Lisa, for help. "Please take care of Ken while I'm gone," I said. "Feel free to use the house however you like." Lisa replied with a smile, but her words were sharp. "Oh dear, you're going through so much, Mary, but don't your parents have enough money to hire someone to help them? Or do you just miss them too much?" She continued, "Don't worry about Ken. I'll take good care of my son. Stay as long as you want." Lisa adores Ken and probably sees me as the woman who stole her son from her. Her sarcastic remarks made me uncomfortable, but I had no choice but to rely on her. I thanked her politely, swallowing my frustration. I packed only what I needed and rushed to my parents' home to take care of them. The days were so busy that 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. I barely stayed in touch with Ken during that time, but it was all worth it because my parents were recovering well. When things finally settled down, I was ready to return home. I got in the car and drove back, excited to be home again, but when I arrived, I couldn't believe my eyes. A for sale sign was posted in front of the house, and the real estate agency listed on the sign was one I didn't recognize. "What's going on?" I whispered in shock. I immediately called Ken, hoping for an explanation. On the other end of the line, Ken chuckled as if mocking me. "I sold the house and moved back to my parents' place. I did everything for you while you were gone. he said casually. I couldn't make sense of what he was saying, so I drove straight to my in-laws' house, which was just a few minutes away. When I arrived, I was stunned to see my personal belongings piled up outside by the door. As I stood there confused, a contractor came up, grabbed the pile of my belongings, and loaded them into a truck. Ken and Lisa were standing nearby, smiling and counting money they'd received from the contractor. They looked different, dressed in fancy clothes and driving a luxury car. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Lisa smirked and said, "I got rid of all your useless junk from that house. You grew up spoiled, so it's no surprise you don't know how to take care of your things." Then, with a cruel smile, she added, "You're such an unfit wife, leaving your husband alone for months just to take care of your parents. I told Ken he should divorce someone like you." Her words hit me like a slap. Ken chimed in, "That house was in your name, so I sold it. Consider it compensation for everything you've done to me. You told me I could do whatever I wanted, so I did." Lisa showed me the paperwork for the sale, grinning smugly as she explained. The contract was dated about a month ago, even though the house was already supposed to be listed with another real estate agency. "You can't do this without my permission. That's my house. Any sale without my signature is invalid, and now you've breached the contract. We'll have to pay compensation," I yelled, panicking. Lisa shrugged and said, "Not my problem. If there's a penalty to pay, that's on you. It's your house, after all." It was clear Lisa believed Ken's version of the story, where he painted himself as the victim. Desperate, I turned to Ken, hoping he'd see reason. But he just smirked, echoing Lisa's attitude. "Finally, I've gotten my revenge," Ken said coldly. "You and your family have looked down on me for being poor my whole life. I've always felt like an outsider, and now I've evened the score. If being poor is such a joke to you, let me show you what money can really do. I refuse to let you live the good life alone. Go to hell." Ken spewed his bitterness at me and tossed divorce papers in my direction, already signed on his end, waiting only for my signature. I could have had Mom handle the filing, but that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying. This way, it's a perfect twist, don't you think? The spoiled rich girl who mocked the poor finally gets knocked down. What will you do now, with no mommy or daddy to save you? Ken and Lisa were practically glowing with excitement, proud of their scheme. But instead of getting angry, I felt calm. They were digging their own graves, and they didn't even realize it. "Sorry to interrupt your little celebration," I said, "but I've got some news for you. This house isn't mine. You're the ones going to hell." "What?" I pulled a document from my bag and handed it to them. "This is the official property registry. As of last week, the house is in Ken's name. The ownership transfer was delayed because of my parents' accident, but it's done now, and since you both agreed to sell the house, well, the consequences are on you." Ken's face went pale as he stared at the document, and Lisa's smugness vanished in an instant. "You don't remember, Ken, but I even double-checked with you to make sure it was okay. My parents trusted you and Lisa. They wanted to show their appreciation for all you've done by giving you the house. They believed you would take care of me, but instead, you betrayed their trust and disrespected their generosity." Both of them froze, trembling as the reality of what they had done sank in. "This isn't just about the house anymore. It's a legal nightmare. Both real estate agencies will be involved in this mess. I'll reach out to the agency I originally signed with, and you can deal with the one you worked with. I can't believe they even accepted your fake story." I took a deep breath and added, "This isn't about money, it's about character. You've shown me what it means to be truly poor, poor in spirit." With that, I pulled out my phone and prepared to call the real estate agency. "Wait," Ken suddenly panicked. "This isn't what I wanted. I was just upset because you left me. Let's talk this through, as a married couple." "Oh, I know. Why don't we just buy back the house that's on the market now? You can call the old real estate agency and pretend none of this happened. You're rich, so you can do that, right? Please?" Ken, panicking, clung to me, desperately trying to fix things. "This whole thing happened because of my mother." Lisa, furious at her son's sudden change in loyalty, snapped, "Hey, Ken, are you betraying me now? I did everything for you. How could you abandon your own mother to take her side? What kind of heartless son are you?" I smirked and replied, "Oh, didn't you say earlier that it's scummy to put parents first, Lisa? So now you should be thrilled Ken isn't scum, right? You should call him a fine son." Lisa's face fell, her words coming back to haunt her, leaving her speechless. Ken, on the other hand, switched sides entirely, pleading with me. You're the most important person to me now, Mary. I promise I'll change my ways and do better. I stared at him coldly. Who said anything about forgiving you? Ken reached for my hand, but I quickly pulled away. Ken, I've been fed up with your laziness for a long time, and when things go wrong, you always blame someone else and expect others to clean up your mess. How can I trust you to change? Let me be clear, I'm not your secretary or your servant. You're an adult, and it's time you take responsibility for your actions. You and Lisa will pay for what you've done, and you'll deal with the consequences for the rest of your lives. With that, I grabbed the divorce papers, signed them on the spot, and walked out, leaving both Ken and Lisa stunned. After some complications, my divorce from Ken was finalized. Ken and Lisa tried to sue my family, claiming they were tricked and demanding compensation, but, as expected, they lost in court. Now, they're being held responsible for significant compensation to both real estate agencies because of their malicious actions. On top of that, they've turned on each other, blaming one another for the disaster they created. It seems they'll be stuck in this mess for a very long time. My company arranged for me to work remotely, so I can continue supporting my parents as they recover from their accident. I'm back at my parents' house, helping them with their rehabilitation. Honey, your bath is ready. Thank you, I'll wash the dishes, so you go ahead and get in first. You must be tired from rehab. Well, you should relax and get in first, Mary. I'll clean the bathtub later. My parents are still recovering, but they continue to support each other and enjoy their time together. Living with them again, I'm reminded of their warmth and the strong bond they share. Watching them, I realized what was missing in my marriage with Ken: respect and care for each other. I know there were things I could have done better, but looking back, I don't think Ken or Lisa ever treated me with that kind of kindness. At first, I was sad and frustrated about the divorce, but now I know it was the right decision. If I meet someone again in the future, I'll be more careful. I never want to worry my parents again. I've learned a lot from everything with Ken and Lisa, and I'll carry those lessons forward in my life, and I'll always be grateful for my parents' love and support as I start a new chapter.
Hey, are you the guy from that interview? After I turned you down, you ended up becoming the driver. A while back, I had interviewed at a construction firm. The manager who conducted my interview smirked upon seeing me and said, "I'd worry about your driving, man. You seem a bit slow." I stayed silent as he pressed on, having been quite harsh during the interview. But soon after realizing who I really was, he quickly turned pale and apologized. My name is James Anderson. At 45, I work in sales at a construction firm that's part of a housing franchise. This franchise involves selling standardized homes. Despite the limitations, I find fulfillment in building ideal homes by listening to clients' needs and proposing solutions within what is possible. Communicating with clients, sharing their worries and joys, is what I cherish in my work. I absolutely love my job. I live with my wife, daughter, and my father-in-law, who is the president of the franchise headquarters. My wife works there too as an office assistant. This company holds study sessions several times a year for employees of franchise partners. It was during one of these that I met my wife when she was handling the reception and distributing documents. Only after we had been dating for a while did I learn her father was the president. This was a shock to me, and although I struggled with the thought of being good enough for the daughter of a president, I still wanted to marry her. I went straight to Robert and got his permission to marry, a story still fondly told among our family members. One day, I was called to the headquarters. Robert, who had kindly welcomed me years ago when I audaciously asked for his daughter's hand in marriage without an appointment, was now 63 years old. Facing me in his office, Robert started the conversation. "As I've mentioned before, I plan to retire from being president when I turn 65, so I want you to take over as president in 2 years. Would you start training as my assistant from now?" This had been discussed before. Robert didn't suggest this just because I was his son-in-law. He liked how I sincerely dealt with every client. Since the president of the construction firm I worked for had agreed to this, I nodded to Robert's words, thinking the day had finally come. "Although I'm inexperienced, I will serve with all my heart," I said. I transitioned from running around on site to learning the ropes of being a president at the headquarters. The job as a presidential assistant was new to me, involving a wide range of tasks. While I got more opportunities to appear in glamorous settings, unlike my sales days at the construction firm, I still felt something was missing. I missed the real voices from the field, like staying late to discuss how to fulfill clients' requests or seeing their joyful faces when looking at their new homes. However, as someone destined to become the next president, I focused on fulfilling my duties as an assistant. One day, I was approached by the head of the customer center for a consultation. It was reported that complaints had been increasing significantly lately for a certain construction firm affiliated with our franchise. The biggest complaint seemed to be that the completed homes were far from what was expected. The manager said that multiple warnings had been issued to the construction firm in the past. However, to no avail, the same kind of complaints kept coming in. A home is often the biggest purchase in a person's life. If people find out that their new home is far from what they envisioned, the disappointment is immense. Moreover, distrust toward the construction firm could eventually extend to the franchise headquarters. Believing that immediate action was necessary, I promptly informed Robert about the situation with the construction firm. May I go back to the field just once more? Even after warnings showed no effect, I wanted to see the situation for myself. All right, see what you can do your way, Robert said, glancing at me and chuckling wryly. I know how passionate you are about being on site. I do feel guilty for pulling you into the presidency. It's not forever, but for now, this issue is in your hands. Thank you so much. I expressed my heartfelt gratitude deeply and applied for a sales position at the construction firm in question, where an opening had just been advertised. Being sent from the headquarters could make them wary, so I decided to enter as a regular job seeker. On the day of the interview, the person who appeared as the interviewer was Dave, the manager of the construction firm. I knew some basic information about him from the documents at headquarters. It appears his father is the president of this construction firm, and he's expected to take over as president in a few years. After skimming through my resume, Dave looked up at me with an unimpressed expression. By the way, I'm pretending to be searching for a new job since the construction firm I worked for went bankrupt, I said. Well, being unemployed at your age must be tough, he said, smirking sympathetically but then deliberately sighing heavily. Look, we're part of a franchise, which means there are a lot of restrictions and a whole lot to learn. You're 45, right? Don't you think that's kind of pushing it? It was clear from his tone that he preferred hiring younger people. I responded seriously, true, I am 45, but I bring experience that younger folks don't have. Yeah, that's nice. Dave cut me off, waving his hand dismissively and frowning as if annoyed. Look, you don't seem to get it, so let me explain. He looked at me as if I were a child who wouldn't listen. We're a franchise. To make a profit while paying royalties to headquarters, it's more important to secure a number of contracts than to indulge in some client fantasy. Do you get that so far? His attitude suggested he thought I was completely clueless. To secure these contracts, we need aggressive sales. Younger, energetic people are simply more practical for us than tired old men. Even someone as slow as you can understand that, right? Dave smirked and sighed again. Indeed, his argument had some points. How to balance the pros and cons of franchising greatly depends on the mindset of the construction firm and ultimately the business owners. Dave's stance was completely opposite to my client-first approach. I couldn't help but counter him. Of course, we're not volunteers here. I understand the need to make a profit, but for our clients, a home represents their dreams and hopes. It's crucial that we engage with each one of them. But once again, Dave interrupted me. What's an unemployed old guy like you talking about? You're pretty cheeky. He had been looking down on me with a smug grin, but the idea of being lectured by a middle-aged unemployed man seemed to really annoy him, and he glared at me fiercely. You talk about soft stuff like that, and that's why you're unemployed. You say your company went under, but weren't you actually fired? He glanced at me, noticing my silence, then eventually returned to grinning smugly. With a smirk back on his face, he pointed his index finger at me and said, Anyway, complaints like that are for headquarters to deal with, not us. You get it now, right? We don't need old guys here. With that, he made it clear he wanted me gone, abruptly ending the interview. I sighed involuntarily. Until this interview, I had hoped I could somehow help steer the construction firm in a better direction. But with a manager like that, complaints about the firm were unlikely to stop. Disheartened, I called Robert, my father-in-law, and the president to report the outcome. A few days later, back at my job as the presidential assistant, I was driving Robert from a meeting with a business partner as we were about to head back to headquarters. Robert said, There's a place I'd like to stop by first. Okay, I replied. Although we had no other appointments outside, we had some time, so I followed his directions and drove to the specified location. It turned out to be the very construction firm we were discussing. Well, it's an honor to have the president of headquarters stop by. As soon as I parked the car, Dave, recognizing it as the company car from headquarters, rushed out and showed a fawning attitude to Robert. But when he noticed me getting out of the driver's seat, his eyes widened slightly before he sneered and addressed me. If it isn't the old man from that time, oh, you got turned down by us and became a driver, huh? This guy came to interview at our place a few days ago. Well, he didn't meet our hiring criteria, so I had to turn him down, Dave explained ingratiatingly, looking over at Robert, who was standing by. Then turning back to me with undisguised contempt, he continued, "Hey, if your driving injures the president, I won't let it go, you know. I'm worried because you seem so slow." His loud laughter was the only sound in the awkward pause that followed. But cutting through the tension, Robert finally spoke up. "Hey, you, is that how you speak to the next president?" Dave tilted his head, confused by Robert's words. "Next president? This gentleman is." "Yes, that's right. The man here, James, is my son-in-law. He's currently assisting me as a presidential aide, but he will eventually take over my position." Stunned, Dave muttered, and Robert affirmed with a stern look. "I've known your father for a long time and have held him in high regard, but unfortunately, it seems you don't fit our company philosophy. We'll need to reconsider the franchise contract." Dave's face drained of color as Robert informed him of this. In a panic, he started to make excuses, his smile tinged with flattery. "I apologize for the oversight. If I had known, I would have shown the proper hospitality." "Oh, you're too sly," he stammered, sweating profusely and with a strange smile. Dave turned his awkward charm back on me. However, Robert dismissed his words. "Oh, you didn't know about him. Is that what you're saying? That means you must not have attended any of the headquarters training sessions, am I right?" Caught by Robert's pointed question, Dave's eyes began to dart around nervously. However, Robert persisted in his advances toward him. "If you had attended even one recent training session, you would have known he is the next president." "Oh, well, that is." Dave was rubbing his hands together as he glanced around. At that moment, a car pulled into the parking lot, and an elderly man stepped out with a surprised expression on his face. I recognized him. He was the president of this construction firm. "What's going on here?" It seemed he had just returned from being out, but when he stumbled upon the scene where Robert, the president of the headquarters with whom he had a personal relationship, his son-in-law, and his own son were apparently having a dispute in the parking lot of his own construction firm, he wore a clear expression of bewilderment. "Please come inside," urged by the firm's president. We moved to the reception room where I explained the origin of the complaint and that his son had apparently been missing the training sessions. Upon hearing my explanation, the president turned his gaze sternly toward his son. "What's this about?" His voice strained with anger and disappointment. His son finally admitted his negligence. "I've been busy with work and haven't attended for about 4 months." Like a child caught in a prank, the son hung his head awkwardly as his father, the president, let out a huge sigh and then deeply apologized to us. "I truly apologize for my son's disrespectful behavior. Additionally, it seems he hasn't been attending the mandatory training sessions for our franchise partners." "What? Really?" Upon hearing his father's words, Dave let out a frantic cry. Apparently, he was unaware that attendance was required. Realizing this, the president sternly reprimanded his wayward son. "You thought you could slack off because you're going to be president one day? I never taught you to disregard our clients' needs and desires just to make a profit." While saying this with a flushed face, the president apologized again. "Truly, this is all my fault for not supervising properly. I think a contract termination is unavoidable." Hearing this, Dave seemed to regret his actions belatedly, lost for words in dismay. The son shrank under his father's reprimand, and the father continued to apologize. Watching the two of them, Robert then slowly began to speak. "Hey, please look up. There's no need to change the franchise contract." Dave looked up before his father at Robert's words, but Robert just glanced at him briefly and continued in a lecturing tone. "Only if your son steps down from his managerial role and agrees to start over as a regular employee to relearn everything." Understood. Both father and son's voices overlapped. Dave looked at his father as if in disbelief, but his father ignored his look. "Thank you very much," he murmured his thanks gruffly. Then the president turned to me. I know it's a lot to ask, but I would really appreciate it if you, James, could help us by becoming our sales manager and turning our company around. Startled by the request, I blinked and then looked at Robert, who nodded as if to say he understood. Responding to that, I gave a nod to Robert and then faced the president again. Yes, I'd be honored to help. And so, I began working as the sales manager at the construction firm. Dave initially seemed unhappy, but perhaps influenced by my and the others' attitudes, he eventually started taking his work seriously. Thanks to this change, complaints ceased, and I am now working daily on the ground, focusing on creating homes that meet our clients' needs, holding true to our mission. Although I will return to headquarters eventually, I am committed to making the most of the time I'm allowed, working hard every day. My name is Carter King. I have elderly parents, but they are not my blood relatives. My real parents died in a car accident when I was very young. With no relatives to take me in, I was placed in a foster home and raised there until I was 5. Even though I felt lonely without a mother and father, I found joy in meal times with delicious food. One day, an elderly couple came to the facility. I vaguely remember them smiling happily as they watched me eat. They had such kind smiles. After a while, the couple, the Kings, decided to adopt me. I quickly opened up to them, calling them Grandpa and Grandma. They had a small garden where they grew vegetables and sold them at a local farmer's market. Though they didn't make much money, the leftovers from the market and the vegetables not good enough for sale ended up on our table every day. I loved Grandma's pickled cucumbers and potato soup. Be thankful for your food, Grandpa always said. There are many people struggling without food today. We must be thankful for every meal, Carter. I hope you grow up to be someone who can help those who are hungry and in pain. I nodded seriously, and he smiled gently. His teachings stayed firmly in my heart. We lived a simple life without luxury, but were raised with a lot of love and happiness. I helped with the farming while attending high school. I thought about getting a job after graduation to help with the family finances. But Grandpa said, "Don't worry about money. Do what you want to do." I think he understood that I wanted to do something that would help people in the future. But at that time, I lacked the knowledge and didn't know where to start. I wanted to go to college to learn about social work, economics, logistics, and more. For times like these, Grandpa said as he handed me a bank book. The account was in my name, Carter King. He had been saving for my education. I was moved to tears by his thoughtfulness. After enrolling in college, I studied hard. I felt happy but also guilty for causing trouble for my grandparents. I had never seen them indulge in any luxuries. They always put me first. I vowed to repay their kindness in a big way once I started working. Keeping that in mind, I devoted myself to my studies, and after graduating from college, I got a job at a food company called Inspiring Foods. This company not only manufactures and sells food products but also focuses on social welfare through food. Grandpa was the one who told me about it. A friend of his worked there, and he happened to hear about the job. "Maybe the job you want to do is here," Grandpa suggested. I was assigned to the sales department and tackled everything from copying documents to data entry and handling phone calls with all my might. I arrived at work earlier than anyone else and studied the material to learn about our products. I also accompanied skilled salespeople on their visits, wanting to learn the job quickly and become a full-fledged worker. However, there was one person who didn't think well of me, Eric, the head of the sales department. Eric was also a board member and held significant power within the company. There was a rumor that he didn't see any use in people who couldn't help him climb the career ladder and was especially tough on newcomers. True to the rumor, I was quickly targeted. Watching me ask a colleague to let me do anything, he seemed to think, "What an overbearing and cheeky newcomer." One day, he suddenly came to my desk and ordered me to come up with a proposal for a new product. "You seem like a hard worker, so you can do it in a day, right?" "Excuse me, that's a bit." Talking back as a newbie? "I'm sorry." Unable to object, I gathered all the ideas I could think of and somehow put together a proposal, which I submitted to him. It was a concept for a stir-fry vegetable sauce inspired by Grandma's cooking. Eric glanced at it and scoffed, pushing the proposal back to me. "Who would buy something like this? Our clients are looking for something more upscale. We don't need cheap stuff like this. Haven't you ever eaten any good food?" "I'm afraid I'm not very familiar with upscale stuff. Could you perhaps give me a few tips on how to improve?" Use your own head to think. Well, I guess that's too much to ask from someone raised in a poor family. Yes, sir. This kind of thing happened almost every day. Honestly, going to work became a struggle, but I had a reason I absolutely couldn't quit. I had a dream of taking my grandparents to a fancy restaurant with my first paycheck. I was sure they'd never been to a fancy place like that. They'd hardly ever eaten out. I thought to raise me, they must have made many sacrifices. I wanted to give them a little luxury for once. I wanted to treat them to an amazingly delicious feast. They raised me like their own family with no blood relation, and I wanted to repay their kindness as soon as I could. A month after I had entered the company, I finally received my first paycheck. I was proud of earning money through my own work. One of my colleagues recommended a fancy restaurant he had used for entertaining clients. So I made a reservation for 3 and called my grandparents. They were surprised when I suggested going to such a luxurious place, thinking we were going to a family diner or something. Are we really going into such a fancy place? Grandma seemed a bit confused. I got my first paycheck. It's money I earned myself as a working adult. It's always been my dream to treat you both, I said. Tears welled up in her eyes. It's all thanks to Carter's thoughtfulness. Let's enjoy the feast without holding back, Grandpa said happily. Nervous about our first time in such a restaurant, we stepped in. Then, from a back room, I heard a familiar voice. As the door opened, Eric came out. Hi, good evening, I said, reflexively straightening my posture. Why are you here? He looked at me curiously. Just having dinner with my family, I replied timidly. This place is for entertaining important clients, not for common folks like you. He scrutinized us and continued. Coming to a restaurant in such cheap attire is out of place. Even if you eat high-end food, you won't appreciate its value. Why don't you go to some cheap diner around the corner? His words pierced my heart. It was one thing for me, but I had made my grandparents feel bad too. That was far from the filial piety I had hoped for. Filled with frustration and shock, I couldn't say anything back. Then Grandpa, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. The one who's out of place is you, he said in a tone I had never heard him use before. Who do you think you're talking to? Eric started angrily coming towards Grandpa, but when he got a good look at Grandpa's face, he exclaimed loudly, Mr. King. Then he quickly went pale and sat down on the spot. Bringing happiness to everyone through the power of food, Grandpa murmured. That was the corporate philosophy of inspiring foods. I've been meaning to talk to you about it, Carter. Are you ready to hear me out? He began to speak quietly. Our family has owned vast lands for generations, which allowed us to live without want. One day, over 30 years ago, the president of Inspiring Foods came to us wanting to buy our land. He wanted to build a factory for his company to expand his business. Upon further discussion, I learned that Inspiring Foods had been donating food to children in foster care. The president grew up in a poor family himself, often going hungry. He had a strong desire to provide delicious meals to as many children as possible. He was passionate about expanding his business to support more orphan children, families, and those in need. I was deeply moved by his feelings. My wife and I have always loved children, but were unable to have any of our own, so we decided to help his cause. We kept only the land necessary for our livelihood and gave the rest to him, agreeing with the philosophy of bringing happiness to everyone through the power of food. I became a shareholder in Inspiring Foods and made further investments. I vowed to use my money to help those in need. We kept in touch ever since, and one day I visited the foster care with him. That's where I met you, Carter. While other children were fussing over not liking carrots or wanting pizza, you were the only one enjoying your meal, saying delicious with your mouth full. It was so adorable. I wanted you to be part of our family, to share meals together, so we adopted you. You grew up to be a very kind-hearted young man capable of empathy. That's why I thought you could be of service at a company like Inspiring Foods. That's admirable, Eric said, standing up and extending his hand to Grandpa. I made a bit of a mistake earlier. Carter is an exceptionally talented individual, he said, forcing a smile and stepping forward. Grandpa coldly shook off his hand. It's too late. You will never understand the true value of a meal, the value of sharing a table with loved ones. Inspiring Foods is a company that saves people through the power of food. You have no right to call yourself a part of Inspiring Foods. It was the first time I saw Grandpa raise his voice. I will inform the president of everything at tomorrow's shareholders meeting. When you return to the office, don't expect to find your seat there. Eric trembled and ran off as if fleeing the scene. That day, the 3 of us enjoyed a delicious feast. As we ate, they told me many things I never knew before. I was also able to tell them how hard I've been working. Did I manage to repay you too a bit? Of course. You've grown up and are working hard as a respectable adult. That's enough repayment for us, Grandpa said with a happy look. Today's meal will be an unforgettable memory, Grandma added, truly enjoying the time with the three of us. I felt our family bond deepen more than ever before. The next day, Eric was nowhere to be found at the company. Fearing that his harassment would come to light, he had vanished. In fact, after my case, there were multiple complaints from other new hires and employees who had been harassed by him, leading to his dismissal by the board. Gerald, the colleague who had recommended the fancy restaurant to me, became the new head of the sales department. No one has worked as hard as you in their first month, Gerald said, praising my efforts. He even took the time to review the proposal Eric had rejected, offering many suggestions. You might become president one day, he said with a laugh, showing affection. I want to continue gaining experience and someday take part in a business that delivers delicious meals to those in need. For now, I'm committed to giving my all to the work in front of me, to help create happy moments around the dining table for others. I work for the sake of society today, as always. I've been married for 20 years now. We don't have any kids, but we're a loving couple, and our reputation as a lovey-dovey pair is widely known within the company where I work. This is largely because I often boast about my good relationship with Emily, whether it's at a drinking gathering or elsewhere. One day, I was at a nearby pub invited by a junior colleague. Could you lend me your ear for some advice? He asked. I was usually approached with such requests, often about how to improve a deteriorating marital relationship. The topics of consultation varied widely from trivial issues to more serious ones. I was approached for advice by a male colleague who had once faced a marriage crisis. He had heard about the good relationship between my wife and me. Although I didn't think I gave any significant advice, that colleague managed to avoid divorce and credited me for it. Since then, for some reason, I started receiving more and more requests for advice on marital matters. A healthy marital relationship is an essential factor in enhancing productivity at the company. Given my position as the HR manager, I couldn't ignore such consultations. Depending on the content of the consultations, there were times when I couldn't help but wonder why someone would ask about certain things. However, when my colleagues come to me for advice, they all have a serious look on their faces. That's why I always take these discussions seriously and engage with my colleagues honestly. As a reference, I sometimes consult with Emily for insights from a female perspective. People often say that after 20 years of marriage, couples stop communicating, but that doesn't apply to us. So I never thought I would end up facing a divorce crisis. It happened one day when, as usual, I had received a consultation regarding marital issues and came home a little late. It was around 9 p.m., but all the lights in the house were off. I called out to Emily as I opened the front door, but there was no response. Emily, a full-time homemaker, rarely left the house at the time I returned. I remembered that she had mentioned having a dinner gathering with her college friends that day, but she had said she would be back by 8 p.m. Is the inside of an empty house always this quiet? I thought to myself as I ventured into the living room. When I turned on the lights, Emily was indeed nowhere to be found. That's when I noticed a piece of paper placed on the table. As I read the message written on it, I was shocked. Thank you for everything. Get along well with that person. It was written. It was a message indicating our breakup. That person undoubtedly referred to another woman. It was apparent that I was suspected of infidelity. However, I had no idea who that person could be. I felt uneasy, but I decided to call Emily. No matter how many times I called, Emily didn't answer, and it didn't go to voicemail. I reluctantly sent a message through WhatsApp, but it remained unread for a long time. I also sent emails, but there was no reply. In desperation, I decided to call Emily's family home. My call, which was a rare occurrence, seemed to surprise my mother-in-law. Is something wrong, Matt? From the tone of her voice, I had a feeling Emily wasn't at her parents' house. I had assumed she had returned there. If Emily wasn't at her parents' house, I hadn't thought about how to explain the reason for my call. Oh no, it's just that Emily was undecided about what to get for Mother's Day, so I thought I could ask you secretly without letting her know. I couldn't help but blurt out those words. However, I felt the awkwardness in that makeshift and cramped excuse. We'll still think it over together, after all. Without waiting to hear my mother-in-law's response, I hastily hung up the phone. Emily didn't come back the next day either, not a single call or message from her. With no clues about Emily's whereabouts, I spent the entire day feeling restless and anxious. It was the evening of the second day since Emily had disappeared. The doorbell rang, and the sound echoed through the quiet house. I rushed to the doorbell monitor, thinking Emily had returned. I was surprised. The person on the monitor was my mother-in-law. "I couldn't help but worry about the way you sounded on the phone," she said. Realizing that there was no use in trying to deceive her, I showed my mother-in-law the message Emily had left behind. As soon as she saw it, her expression turned stern. Moreover, she gave me a suspicious look. I explained calmly that I had no idea about the contents of the message. However, my mother-in-law didn't seem convinced. Her expression remained stern. In the end, her doubts about me were unresolved, and she left. Since Emily's disappearance, I have thought repeatedly about what the message meant. I still had no clue as to what it was referring to. After much contemplation, I decided to visit the police station and file a missing person report. However, the police officer I spoke to didn't take me seriously. Even when I persisted, the officer seemed annoyed and asked, "Have there been any strange changes in your wife's behavior recently? For example, any signs of another man?" This unexpected question caught me off guard, and in a fit of anger, I retorted, "There's no way something like that would happen with Emily." However, the officer, who had likely dealt with such attitudes from concerned spouses before, said to me without changing his expression, "I will accept the missing person report for now." I couldn't help but feel that his response was mechanical and that they weren't genuinely interested in finding Emily. As I left the police station and returned home, I couldn't shake off the word cheating that the officer had mentioned. I reflected on Emily's recent behavior, but no matter how I thought about it, I couldn't find any suspicious actions on her part. For days after Emily disappeared, I was awakened by the sound of the doorbell. I had been sleeping in the living room instead of the bedroom since Emily's disappearance, ready to respond to any communication. I was taken aback as I looked at the monitor. It was my mother-in-law who appeared on the screen. I hastily opened the front door. My mother-in-law stood there with a stern expression. I prepared myself for a scolding from her. However, she uttered surprising words to me. "Emily is at my house right now." These unexpected words left me frozen. As I took a deep breath, I snapped back to reality and quickly got ready to leave the house. Just before I left, my mother-in-law said to me, "I suspected you. I'm sorry." It seems that she wanted to apologize in person rather than over the phone. Her expression had been stern because she likely felt sorry for me. As I rushed to Emily's parents' house, I contemplated the situation. The last time my mother-in-law visited my house, Emily was probably at her parents' place. Emily must have suddenly returned home and explained the situation to her. My mother-in-law had likely come to my house to hear the truth directly from me. She might have intended to interrogate me rigorously depending on the circumstances. However, seeing my flustered state at that moment, she might have doubted the accuracy of Emily's words and left without saying anything. Today she probably heard something from Emily and came to apologize. With these thoughts in mind, I hurried to Emily's parents' house. It was about a 20-minute walk from my house, but I wanted to confirm Emily's safety as soon as possible, so I ran. When I arrived, Emily saw my face, apologized, and burst into tears loudly. I felt at a loss for words, somewhat comically disoriented. Finally, when Emily regained her composure, she began speaking quietly. After hearing her story, I felt all the tension leave my body. The reason she had left home was a complete misunderstanding on Emily's part. On that day, it seemed that Emily saw me while she was on her way home after finishing dinner with her friends. I was walking while carrying a small child with a woman in her early 30s beside me. "They looked just like a real parent and child," Emily muttered. Hearing that, I remembered the day when Emily spotted me. On that day, I had received a consultation from a junior colleague and had a discussion with his wife in the evening after work. The colleague, who was still working, had 2 children who were about 2 years old. He didn't attend the discussion because he thought he might inadvertently butt in if he was there. The reason the couple's relationship began to deteriorate was that they started having heated arguments due to the wife's constant complaints about him coming home late from work every day. At that time, he was heavily involved in a significant project, especially during its final stages, which required him to work late into the night. When he returned home, he was always exhausted and had no patience to listen to his wife's words. Then one day, his wife's patience reached its limit, and she started getting extremely angry with a furious tone. The employee thought it was bad, but it was already too late. No matter how many times he apologized, his wife seemed beyond consolation. I can't take it anymore. Please do something, the employee pleaded with me. That's when I took steps to repair their relationship. Of course, Emily did not know these things. Seeing us who appeared to be walking together amicably, Emily instinctively suspected me of cheating. In reality, it was a misunderstanding. We were just walking together to the bus terminal near the station. Emily discreetly followed the three of us. It seems her intuition turned into conviction when the child I was holding called me Daddy. Moreover, I replied with a cheerful "What's up?" I vividly remember how I couldn't help but feel delighted when a small child called me Daddy, and how I responded with a smile. The moment I answered with a smile, Emily said everything went dark before her eyes. Shocked, she left a message at home right after returning and then left the house. When she arrived at her parents' home, she tearfully recounted the day's events to her mother. After releasing all the pent-up emotions, Emily seemed to have found some relief and ended up falling asleep. When Emily woke up, her mother was no longer there. At that moment, her mother must have been on her way to my house. Today, Emily realized that it was all a misunderstanding. One day, at the suggestion of my mother-in-law, who said, "It's better to distract yourself a little," we went to the shopping center. Emily saw the woman and child she had seen in town before, accompanied by a man of the same age. Acting on impulse, Emily rushed towards them. Emily stood in front of the three of them, but couldn't find the words to say. The man initially showed a surprised expression when Emily suddenly appeared, but in the next moment he smiled. Emily was taken aback by his next words. "Oh, Mrs. Thomas, hello. We've always appreciated your help." "Why does this man know me?" Emily wondered. It seems the man explained. "Well, Mr. Thomas had a picture of you two on his smartphone's wallpaper. He proudly showed it off when we talked about our troubled relationship. But the other day, your child called him Daddy," Emily mentioned, and the woman beside the man had a puzzled look. Then, in the next moment, she apologetically explained, "I'm sorry. Our child calls any adult man Daddy." Someone overheard it and misunderstood. Upon hearing Emily's explanation, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. "You were always a bit clumsy, but this one is the funniest until now." When Emily was told that, she became embarrassed. Then she finally smiled. While looking at her smile for the first time in 4 days, I couldn't help but say, "Please continue showing me that smile from now on." In response, Emily nodded quietly. "My name is Heather. I'm 24 years old and I work in an office. Right now, I'm waiting for my date with Tim. We've been seeing each other for 3 months. This is actually my first time dating a guy. I grew up in the countryside with lots of farms and very few people. Sometimes I wondered if there were more raccoons than humans. When I moved to the city, I was amazed by all the buildings and people. My dad was very strict and made me focus on my studies. About 6 months ago, we had a big fight. I told him I was an adult and should make my own choices. He disagreed and said if I didn't listen, I should leave. So, I left and gained my independence. A friend took me to a social event, and that's where I met Tim." "Heather, have you been waiting long?" Tim asked. "Nope, I just got here," I replied. Tim is caring and always makes time for our weekly dates, even though he's busy. He suddenly pulled out a necklace and put it on me. "I don't know if you like it," he said. "It's beautiful, thank you." I was thrilled. My parents never let me wear a necklace or gave me birthday presents. I admired the necklace Tim gave me. The next day, a colleague said, "It's probably from a dollar store." Another junior colleague said, "I don't know what kind of guy he is, but he must think you're easy to please." If I were you, I'd be mad about a dollar store item. I was surprised. I didn't notice it was from a dollar store, but I was happy because it was the thought that counted. "Well, if you're okay with it, then it's fine," she shrugged. Then Tim suddenly broke up with me over the phone. We hadn't talked much lately, and he seemed different. We used to talk and go on dates often, but that stopped. When I tried to reach out, he became distant. When he finally answered, he seemed cold. "Let's break up," he said. "Why? Did I do something to upset you?" I asked. "No, not really." "Then why?" I wanted to know the reason, but he just sighed. "Such a hassle," he said. "What? Why all of a sudden?" I was flustered, my voice choked with tears. It seemed like Tim didn't like that poor people always cry easily. Our phone call abruptly ended, and despite my many attempts to reach him, he never answered. Being dumped without understanding the reason made me really sad, and I couldn't eat for a while. "Heather, try to cheer up. You haven't eaten anything, and you're losing weight, my junior colleague said, worried about me. She took good care of me, but I was still down. Fast forward 3 years. One day, I was enjoying burgers at the park with my junior when a couple walked by. We're going on a night cruise for dinner. Oh, it's the popular premium one. Awesome, I can't wait, said a familiar voice. When I looked up, I saw Tim in a glossy suit and a flashy woman in a short jacket, mini skirt, and high heels. I was surprised to see Tim again, but he didn't notice me. Instead, he snorted dismissively at us. That's lame. Fast food at the park totally screams poverty. Ha ha ha, if you say something like that, she might cry, Tim said, laughing with his girlfriend. Tim continued, I'm shocked. I knew you were poor, but you're still scraping the bottom. Breaking up was the right call. He sneered at me and my junior, who were eating burgers. Wait, Tim, you used to date someone like this? Were you blind? The woman said, fanning herself with her flashy nails. She seemed rich when we first met at a party, but she was happy with a dollar store necklace. What a turnoff. Now she's eating a burger at a park. Totally bottom class. Tim kept saying horrible things, and his attitude was so different from when we dated. My junior raised her voice. Hey, how could you be so rude? Apologize right now. You're annoying. Birds of a feather flock together. People like you always have a big mouth but no bite. Tim and his girlfriend continued to laugh at us. Hey, enough is enough, Heather. Let's just ignore them, my junior said, still upset. I noticed people around us whispering and looking bothered, so I calmed her down. Ha ha ha, you can't even argue back. You're really hopeless. Enjoy being poor. It doesn't seem like you'll ever pull off brand name clothes like us, Tim said as they walked away briskly. Heather, aren't you upset? Do you still have feelings for him? My junior asked, still furious. I shook my head. Want to go on a dinner cruise? I asked. My junior was caught off guard for a moment. And are their clothes really knockoffs? She asked. When I nodded, I explained my plan to her. A few hours later, dressed up, my junior and I headed for the dinner cruise. There was a long line for the popular cruise, where people could enjoy city lights from a luxury liner and a fancy dinner. Noticing the couple we saw earlier in the line, my junior and I walked past them. Ha, Heather. Tim waved dismissively as he noticed us. What's up, broken lonely woman? You miss me so much you followed me here, even changing your clothes. No can do. Honestly, I can't deal with someone like you. Next to him, his girlfriend was also laughing. You regretted it that much? Too bad you can't get a ticket now. Even I had a hard time getting this. She waved the tickets and grinned. My junior colleague, in a cheerful mood, pulled out our tickets from her purse. Those are just regular tickets, right? You struggled to get those. Heather can easily get express tickets even on the same day. What? And not just express, but the most expensive private room premium tickets. Those are not less than several $1,000s, right? Seeing their shocked faces, my junior grinned. Well, good luck with the line. Leading my grinning junior, I bypassed the long line and headed towards the express gate. Why? What the heck, Tim? What's her deal? She isn't just a lowly woman, right? Their voices reached us from afar. Serves them right, isn't that right, Heather? My junior seemed happy that our revenge went well. Half an hour later, as departure time approached, Tim and his girlfriend approached us on the exclusive terrace where we were enjoying our welcome drinks. Shouldn't this area be off limits with your tickets? Shut up and explain, Tim approached aggressively. My junior frowned and whispered to me that she was going to call someone, then quickly turned around. I'm perturbed, Tim continued to pressure me. Why does a lowlife like you have express tickets? You even made a fool out of us in public. Thanks to you, we were laughed at while we were in line. We've been embarrassed and can't keep quiet anymore. You must have gone into debt or something to force your way through. Now get laughed at by the express passengers. Apologize now for a poor person overstretching. As the couple kept making a fuss, the other passengers on the terrace started to gather around. Then Tim, who was staring at my chest, let out a creepy chuckle. Even if you somehow managed to get the ticket, this is not acceptable, Heather. Ha! As I tilted my head, Tim put his hands in his pockets, puffed his chest out, and looked confident. Well, even if you change your clothes, I bet it's just some cheap junk. Did you dump all your money into the ticket? Strutting around with a necklace from the dollar store, and you think you're some big shot. Gonna live off of just water in the park? Smile, huh? Ha ha, no, that's funny. A dollar store. I stared at him intently as I repeated his words. Are you really into these kids' toys? But come on, it's pathetic for an adult to be wearing dollar store stuff. Tim pointed to my necklace and laughed loudly for everyone to hear. As the murmurs among the passengers grew louder, Tim's girlfriend also raised her voice. Timmy, you're lucky you dumped this poor woman. Now you're in love with me. Both of them laughed, calling me a poor woman again. I didn't think you were this kind of person when we were dating. I regret being so blind, I retorted. Tim laughed as if it was the funniest thing he'd heard. That's rich coming from you. She's a real lady compared to you. I'm embarrassed that I even dated someone like you. Give me back the time I wasted on you, you poor thing. Tim's voice echoed throughout the patio as the crowd around us backed away. We heard some people hurrying toward us. Security, over here. Catch them, those two. My junior colleague led the security officers who swiftly surrounded Tim and his girlfriend. What the hell, man? Get out of our way. You're ruining everything. Although they protested loudly, their tickets didn't allow them access to this area in the first place. Moreover, their ruckus attracted a crowd, and security managed to hold them. We're customers. You can't just grab us like this. You should be grabbing that woman. She's the one who doesn't belong here. She's poor. But the security officers maintained a stern look, glaring at the rowdy pair. Despite this, Tim did not stop hurling insults at me. Enough already, my junior colleague raised her voice. I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but Heather isn't poor. Ha! Are you just bluffing? Hilarious, Tim laughed. That's right, you liar, his girlfriend added. It's not a lie, my junior colleague said. There are people here who know we're right. At her urging, a few hands rose among the passengers. Raise your hands if you can confirm that Heather is the future president and that this cruise is managed by a subsidiary of the large company run by her father, my colleague continued. More hands went up. Tim and his girlfriend finally stopped their resistance, looking dumbfounded with their mouths wide open. Future president? Tim stammered, unable to grasp the situation. He looked back and forth between me and the other passengers. What does that mean? You said you were just a regular employee. At the time, I explained. I was fed up with all the business studies my father forced on me, so I quarreled with him and left home. I chose to work at a company unrelated to my father because I wanted to be away from him. But 2 years ago, my father fell ill, and I returned home. When I was down after being dumped by you, I accepted my father's apology, who had softened due to his illness, and returned to the path of management. It can't be, Tim said, shocked. Tim's girlfriend was equally stunned. Tim, your outfit tonight, all of it, was my doing. You wanted it to look low-key expensive, so it may look plain, but it required hundreds of dollars. Oh, and the necklace, you mocked. It's not a dollar store toy. Heather, how much was that? About $100,000, I guess, I replied. No way, Tim gasped. Chuckles leaked out from the onlookers as Tim and his girlfriend looked like their souls had been sucked out. I apologize, everyone, I said to the crowd. My father is always grateful for your hard work, and today he invited everyone as a thank you. That's why I was able to get tickets so easily. Realizing my necklace was actually an ultra-luxury item worth over $100,000, Tim's face turned pale. Heather, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I'll apologize for everything. I'll break up with her. Flip-flopping now? Who do you think got you on this cruise in the first place? His girlfriend snapped. Shut up, you flashy woman. You don't see your gaudy brand clothes at all? Tim retorted. What did you say? You're not cool at all, even in your shiny clothes. Apologize to the clothes for not being suitable for brand items. As security was about to escort the two arguing among themselves, I smiled and said, You two seem to think each other's clothes are brand name, but those aren't knockoffs, are they? Ha! The two looked at each other, startled. You can fool each other, but you know you're wearing fake brands, right? If you can fool each other, doesn't that mean neither of you has an eye for quality? Well, I can't really talk since I can't tell the difference with dollar store items. The passengers, noticing my sarcasm, giggled. Don't mess with me, Tim and his girlfriend shouted, shaking off security and hurling insults at each other. They won't be able to sit at their dinner table anymore. They probably overreached on the tickets, my junior colleague shrugged. The dinner course was so good, I wanted to show off. I wish they could have at least eaten it. You're so serious about it, it's funny, my junior colleague laughed out loud. All the same, it makes sense for you to be here, I said. Should I really have let you buy such an expensive outfit for me? Absolutely, my junior colleague replied. Between us, the CEO is about to change soon. My dad is fine now, but he's saying he can't handle the load anymore because of his age. This outfit and necklace you chose, I plan on using them for the inauguration ceremony. Will you attend in that outfit as well? Well, if that's the case, I'm thrilled. I'll follow your lead from now on. Let's stay friends even when we're old as grandmas, okay? Yeah, I agreed. We enjoyed a dinner cruise with such conversations. A few hours later, as we disembarked from the ship, Tim was waiting for us. Hey Heather, let's give it another shot. You and me. I promise I'll turn over a new leaf because I don't think I'll ever meet someone as pure-hearted as you who can be moved by something from a dollar store. Tim's belly grumbled loudly as he begged pitifully. It seemed they had been isolated in an empty room during the cruise as their ruckus was disturbing the other guests. You didn't eat dinner, did you? I asked. Nah, skipping a meal isn't a big deal. More importantly, I beg you, Heather, Tim pleaded. In response, I took something out of my bag. Here, if you'd like, you can have this. Oh, thanks, Heather. Wait, what's this? A wristwatch from a dollar store. What, Heather? Are you trying to get back at me? Don't call me Heather. I don't want to see you at all from now on. If this was worth 100 grand, you'd be happy, wouldn't you? But if it's a dollar store item, you don't want it. In the end, all you see is money. Wait a minute, excuse me, security, I called out. Tim was restrained by the security guards once again and dragged away. Later, I heard that Tim had caused another uproar, argued with his girlfriend, and ending up getting reported. Apparently, he's often seen at the park, blowing his stomach with water. I'm sure he's broken up with his girlfriend. On the other hand, I successfully became CEO and now work hard every day with a reliable junior at my side. The newly launched burger chain is doing better than expected, and there's even talk of opening more new stores. I haven't found a new love interest yet, but I hope to meet a good person next time. Hello, my name is Bree. A lot has happened to me in the past couple of months, and I thought, what better way to vent than to write? To start off, I'd like to introduce my husband, Zach. He's the love of my life and my rock. Zach is my support system and my best friend. We've always had a very loving and fulfilling relationship. Like every couple, we've had fights, but we've always been very honest with each other, and I absolutely love that about us. But there was one thing that troubled our relationship. My mother-in-law, Joan. She always tried to ruin our happiness. Joan would say things to Zach that made him doubt if I was good enough for him. It hurt a lot to think she didn't believe I was worthy of his love. But Joan didn't stop there. She even tried to set Zach up on a date while we were already married. It was beyond mean and disrespectful. Zach didn't agree with her, but her constant bothering started to affect him. He began to pull away from me, and it felt like we were growing apart. Can we talk about what's been going on with you lately? I feel like you're ignoring me, and it's been bothering me, I asked. No, I'm not, Zach replied. I really feel like you're struggling with something. It's affecting us. I need you to tell me what you're feeling, I insisted. It's not a big deal. We're just going through a rough patch. It'll pass, he said dismissively. But it's been going on for a while now. I miss us, you know, I pleaded. Look, it's probably just stress from work or something. We'll be fine. Don't make it into a big deal, he said. I don't think it's just about work. I feel like this has something to do with your mother and what she's been saying, I pressed. My mom doesn't mean any harm. She's just concerned about me. It's not worth getting all worked up about, he responded. Your mother is not concerned about you. She's trying to break us apart. Please tell me you're not actually listening to her, I said, desperate. You're blowing this out of proportion. It's not as serious as you're making it out to be. Just let it go, he said, brushing me off. His casual disregard for my feelings left me profoundly saddened, as though our once cherished love had lost its significance to him. I experienced a sense of betrayal, questioning whether I truly belonged with someone who could dismiss me so effortlessly. During this period, I grappled with a profound sense of loneliness. One day, Joan came to visit us and asked for some alone time with Zach. Deep down, I felt something was really wrong. Regardless of my instincts, I respected their privacy and stayed outside the room, but curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't help but listen in on their conversation. What I heard really shocked me. Joan was saying mean things about me to Zach, trying to convince him that we should get a divorce. She even brought out papers for him to sign, wanting me to sign them too. It hurt so much, and my world felt like it was falling apart. Zach sounded uncomfortable, trying to disagree with what she was saying. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the room, determined to confront Joan about her behavior. Joan, why do you have such a problem with me? Why are you literally harassing my husband? I demanded. Oh, please, I'm not harassing him. I'm just looking out for him, she replied. How is talking crap about me and forcing him to give me a divorce supposed to be looking out for him? I asked incredulously. I just think that Zach deserves someone better than you, someone more attractive and successful, and I'm trying to nudge him in that direction, she said. What is wrong with you? I exclaimed. Okay, that's enough, Mom. I've tolerated your behavior for a long while now, but now that you've properly dragged Bree into this and hurt her, I'm putting my foot down. I need you to leave us alone, Zach said firmly. Zach, you don't understand that I'm only trying to make your life better, Joan protested. If you actually cared for me, you'd see that I'm already living my best life right now with Bree. Please leave and don't even try to come back. I don't want to talk to you anymore, Zach said, standing his ground. You'll regret this, mark my words, Joan warned as she left. After Joan left, Zach and I sat down to talk about what happened. Babe, I'm so sorry for everything. I want you to know that I never once considered anything my mother said. It's just she's the woman who raised me and I couldn't bring myself to get angry at her, Zach explained. It hurt me, babe. It hurt that you didn't open up to me about anything. Do you know how much pain I've endured? I asked, tears in my eyes. I know, and I really regret that. I thought I could handle it on my own, but the moment she involved you, I couldn't bear it anymore. I should have stood up for you sooner, Zach admitted. You know what hurts even more? That it took so much for you to stand up for me. It feels like I'm not enough, like I'm not worth fighting for, I said, my voice breaking. That's not true at all. You're the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I'm so sorry I made you feel like you aren't. I'll be better, I promise. I'll always stand up for you, no matter what the circumstances are. You deserve nothing less, Zach vowed. It took time, but eventually, I found it in my heart to forgive him and begin healing. Healing wasn't easy. Joan really hurt me, but with love, patience, and open communication, we rebuilt our relationship stronger than ever. We learned to trust and support each other no matter what. We grew closer, cherishing the love and happiness we share. 3 years had passed, and we had completely lost contact with Joan. She never reached out to us. And honestly, we didn't make any effort to check in with her either. Life moved on, and we focused on making our lives happier with each other. Recently, all my hard work paid off when I received a tremendous promotion at work. It was a moment of pride and joy for both Zach and me. Along with the promotion came incredible benefits and a significant increase in my salary. We celebrated this huge accomplishment, feeling grateful for the success that had come our way. Zach couldn't contain his happiness and admiration for me. He took to social media to express his appreciation, posting a heartfelt message about my achievements. Little did we know that Joan would come across that post and decide to contact Zach. When Joan called, Zach answered, but his tone was cold and distant. What do you want? Zach asked. Zach, I want to apologize for everything I've done. I've been going to therapy and it made me realize how hurtful and toxic my behavior has been. I truly am sorry, Joan said. I'm glad you understand the mistakes you've made, Zach replied. Thank you, Zach. I hope you'll be able to forgive me, Joan said. It'll be a long time before that happens. You'll have to work very hard to prove to me and Bree that you've actually changed, Zach responded. Of course, I'll do anything. I just want to have you back in my life, Joan pleaded. How about I show you how much I've changed this week? Joan asked. What do you mean? Zach inquired. I have a reunion with some old friends in our town, so I was wondering, would it be possible for me to stay with you for a couple of days? Please, I promise I've changed, and I want to earn your forgiveness as fast as I can because I miss you, my dear, Joan said. Fine, but just for a couple of days, Zach agreed. Thank you. I can't wait to see you again. You won't regret letting me stay with you, I promise, Joan said. Zach ultimately agreed because he still loved his mother and believed that she had changed. He felt a sense of relief knowing that she was doing better. When Zach told me about the situation later that day, I couldn't help but be visibly upset. Why would you even invite her after all the pain she has caused? She literally tried to force you to divorce me, I exclaimed. I know, but I heard the sincerity in her voice. It's been a long time since that incident. I genuinely believe she has changed and wants to make things right. I want to give her a chance and see if we can rebuild our relationship, Zach explained. It's hard for me to let go of my anger. I'm scared that she might hurt us again. I need you to understand that if Joan tries anything, I won't hesitate to leave immediately, I said, my voice trembling. Yeah, but don't worry. I promise to keep a close eye on my mother. If she crosses any boundaries or causes any harm, I will stand up for you. You're my priority, and I won't let her hurt you again, Zach reassured me. All right, I trust you, and I hope you're right about Joan's transformation. Let's hope this reunion brings positive change for all of our sakes, I said, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. The next few days, I was an anxious mess as I waited for Joan to arrive. When the day finally arrived, Joan greeted us with warm hugs and genuine smiles. She sincerely apologized for her past behavior, expressing her desire to make things right. I was surprised by Joan's new attitude. In the past, she would have found a way to belittle my promotion, but this time she surprised me by appreciating my hard work. It felt good to be acknowledged and appreciated by her. As the next 2 days passed, there were no incidents or conflicts. Joan seemed to genuinely enjoy our company and made an effort to get to know me better. We engaged in pleasant conversations, laughed together, and shared stories. It was a side of Joan I hadn't seen before, and it gave me hope that perhaps our relationship could be rebuilt. One night, Zach and I talked about Joan's change of heart. I'm sorry for getting upset when you told your mom that she could stay with us. I know it wasn't an easy choice, and I can see why you wanted to give her a chance, I said. You don't need to say sorry, babe. I know she hurt us before, and I get why you were worried. It's normal to be skeptical after what we've been through, Zach replied. I have to say that I'm really surprised that Joan actually said sorry and went to therapy. I didn't expect her to change, I admitted. I hope this is a chance for us to have a better relationship with her, Zach said. I agree. It's nice to have my mother back. Plus, I've always wanted you and my mom to get along. We've been through a lot, and if there's a chance to make things better, I want to try, Zach said. I'm hopeful but cautious. I'm not gonna lie, it's a big step for both of us, but I want to support you and have a healthier relationship with your mom. Just promise me you'll watch for any problems and support me if things go wrong, I said. Of course, babe. You'll always be my #1 priority. I'll be careful and make sure we both feel okay. We'll take it slow and see how things go, Zach promised. We were careful but hopeful as we considered rebuilding our relationship with Joan. We knew that trust would take time to rebuild, but we were willing to give her a chance. It was a small step forward, and we remained hopeful about the future. We understood that change doesn't happen overnight, but we were willing to see if Joan's transformation was real. The next day, we relaxed at home for the weekend. The three of us enjoyed each other's company and had a good time. Joan mentioned that we hadn't celebrated my promotion yet. Zach jokingly agreed and suggested we plan the celebration for later. I was excited about the idea of celebrating with the new and improved Joan. Zach kindly offered to go to the grocery store to get the ingredients for dinner while I volunteered to take care of the drinks. But Joan insisted on making the drinks herself. Oh, don't worry about the drinks, Brie. Let me take care of it. After all, we're celebrating your big promotion, and you shouldn't be working on a day like this, Joan said. Thank you, but really, it's fine. Zach and I can handle it, I replied. Yeah, Mom, she makes some really good drinks, so there's no need for you to go through any trouble, Zach added. Brie, you're the guest of honor here, and I want to do something special for you. Please let me prepare the drinks. It's the least I can do, Joan insisted. Mom, it's okay. Brie already said she can handle it, and she's excited to make the drinks. Let's just enjoy the celebration together, Zach interjected. I know, but I really want to contribute. It's important to me, Brie. Please let me do this for you. It would mean a lot to me, Joan pleaded. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Joan, but I prefer to handle the drinks myself. It's something I enjoy doing, and it will make the celebration even more special for me, I explained. I understand, but please, Brie, let me take this opportunity to show you how much I care. I want to make this night memorable for you, Joan insisted. Okay, you can take care of it if you really want to. I finally relented. Joan's insistence made me feel uncomfortable and worried. My instincts told me that something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out why. It was confusing because Joan had been treating me well and showing signs of change. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, maybe because of how she had treated me in the past. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I knew I had to trust my gut and be cautious around Joan. When Zach went to the store, I told Joan that I needed to finish some work and went to my room. I suddenly felt scared of Joan and locked myself in, needing some time alone to think. I realized I couldn't share my concerns with Zach. How could I explain that my gut was telling me something was wrong with Joan? He wouldn't believe me, and it would only upset him. Keeping our relationship safe became my priority, even if it meant keeping my fears to myself. While waiting for Zach's return, I couldn't shake off the fear inside me, but I decided to stay alert and ready for anything that might happen. I hoped and prayed that my instincts were wrong and that the celebration would go smoothly. As we sat at the table, I watched Joan and Zach closely. Zach was finishing preparing dinner while Joan began preparing the drinks. She had her back turned to me. Zach turned to chat with me, but my focus stayed on Joan. Something felt strange, and my gut told me to be alert. In a quick moment when Joan thought Zach and I were too involved in our conversation, I saw her take something from her pocket and add it to one of the drinks. My heart sank, and I got really worried. What was Joan doing? I carefully noted which cup she tampered with. Joan came over and placed all 3 cups on the table, purposely setting the cup she had tampered with in front of me. Instead of confronting her directly, I fought on my feet. You know what, babe? I think your drink is mixed better. Can we switch? I suggested. Oh, but I made the drinks all the same way. There's no need to switch, Joan quickly interjected. It's all right, Mom. Brie can be a little weird about some things. Let her have the drink she wants, Zach said. Thanks, babe. I just have this thing about how the drink looks, you know? I added. Are you sure, dear? I made this one especially for you, Joan insisted. It's all right. I just have a preference. I really appreciate your effort, though, I said. Mom, it's fine. Brie knows what she likes. Let's just enjoy the celebration and have a good time, Zach added. Well, if you're sure, Joan reluctantly agreed. Positive, I confirmed. I couldn't help but smirk, knowing that Joan's plan had failed. But things got tense as Joan started trembling and sweating a lot. She realized she couldn't serve me the drink she had tampered with. When Zach returned with the food, ready to take a sip, Joan's desperation reached a peak, and she knocked the cup out of his hands, shocking him. What the hell? Why'd you do that? Zach exclaimed. Tell him what you did with that drink, I demanded. Oh, I thought I saw a bug in his drink, that's all, Joan stammered. Don't even try to lie, Joan. I saw you slip something into the drink that was meant for me, I said firmly. Is that true, Mom? Did you really do that? Zach asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Zach, I just want you to have a better life. Why can't you see that? Joan cried. Hasn't my success been enough for you? You've always complained that I'm not successful enough, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Well, being successful doesn't mean you're pretty or have a better personality, Joan retorted. That's enough? What you're really searching for is a spineless woman who you can use to control me, Zach said, his voice filled with anger. No, that's not true. I just want anyone but her for you, Joan insisted. I don't want anyone else. I'm glad I have Brie by my side. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm never giving you another chance, Zach declared. Zach, don't do this to me, Joan pleaded. I can't believe you. You're pathetic. Get out of my sight, Zach said, his voice cold. Joan quietly packed her things and left. It felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. Zach looked at me with sadness and apologized for everything that had happened. I could tell he truly regretted ever giving his mom a chance. I told him he had no need to apologize. He was not wrong for believing that his mother had changed, especially because I myself believed in that change. We learned the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for what we believed in. Our love grew stronger, supported by respect and commitment. We no longer let Joan's toxic influence define us. Instead, we focused on nurturing our relationship and creating a life filled with happiness, trust, and genuine connection. Our journey showed us the power of love and forgiveness. We learned to choose our own path, free from toxic people. Together, we embrace a brighter future, grateful for the lessons we learned and the unbreakable bond we shared. So, if there's one thing I want to share through this story, it is to always trust your instincts, cherish those who stand by your side, and never be afraid to cut ties with toxic people, even if they are family. We rushed your husband to the emergency room after a traffic accident. Suddenly receiving a call from the police, I dropped the coffee cup I was holding. It couldn't be true because my husband died 2 years ago when he fell into the sea. There were even witnesses. Someone must be impersonating my husband. To find out who and why someone would do such a thing, I headed to the hospital. When I arrived at the emergency room, I saw the pale profile of a man lying on a bed. No way. This can't be happening. I almost cried out in shock and covered my mouth with my hand. Oh, honey, it was unmistakably my husband. I am Annabelle, a 32-year-old company employee raising my 4-year-old daughter alone. My husband Tony was supposed to have died 2 years ago. I was told that he fell into the sea and lost his life while working overseas. When I first received the news, I hoped it was a case of mistaken identity. But according to the police, there were witnesses, so I had to believe it. According to those who saw it, my husband jumped in to save someone who had fallen into the sea, and then he disappeared. At that time, sharks were also seen in the water, and it was believed that both the person who fell into the sea and my husband were eaten by the sharks. My husband was rather timid, and I was surprised that he had the courage to jump into the sea to save someone. The local police conducted multiple searches, but my husband was never found, and only his backpack was found floating in the sea. In his backpack, there were photos of me and our daughter, his wallet, and other items. Tony, who usually told me not to touch his backpack, might have been embarrassed to show that he kept our photos in it. Thinking this, my sorrow over losing my husband grew even deeper. Eventually, I had no choice but to put his backpack in the coffin as a substitute for him and hold a formal funeral for closure. Why did you leave us? I was grieving the sudden loss, but I had my daughter left behind. At the time, my 2-year-old daughter didn't understand the meaning of her father's funeral and smiled while sitting on my lap. Her behavior brought tears to the attendees. Poor thing, she doesn't understand that her father has passed away. The venue was filled with whispers and sobbing. After the funeral, I faced my daughter with my best smile, determined not to cry in front of her anymore, and decided to do my best at work and raising my child alone. 2 years passed. I got used to living without my husband, rushing every morning to get dressed and eat, and it became a routine to greet the smiling photo of my husband with, "Daddy, we're off." I took my daughter to daycare and headed to my office. My parents often told me to come back home, but I wanted to keep the promise I made to my husband before he went overseas. I'll raise our daughter well, even on my own. Since my husband's body was never found, he was legally considered missing, so I couldn't receive a survivor's pension, making it financially difficult on my own. But I worked hard for my daughter's sake. Despite being only 4, my daughter helped me with folding laundry and putting away dishes, showing her consideration for me. Living with my kind and honest daughter was poor but very happy. Then one day, I received a sudden call from the police. "We rushed your husband to the emergency room after a traffic accident." Ha! My husband died 2 years ago. What? The shock was so great that I dropped and broke the coffee cup I was holding. What is going on? Confused, I thought someone must be impersonating my husband. To find out who and why someone would do such a thing, I visited the hospital's emergency room where I saw the pale profile of a man lying on a bed. No way. This can't be happening. I almost cried out in shock and covered my mouth with my hand. Oh, honey, it was unmistakably my husband. How can Tony, who was supposed to be dead, be here in America, alive? Even though I wanted to ask, he lay there unconscious. According to the police, my husband was riding a bicycle when he was hit from behind by a car. A nurse handed me his backpack as I stood there in shock. The backpack was very similar to the one I had placed in his coffin at the funeral. When I looked inside, there was a cell phone, and the home phone number in the address book was ours, which is why the police contacted me. When I opened the cell phone, I saw frequent messages exchanged with an unfamiliar woman. This woman might know about these past 2 years. I decided to call the number. "I'm sorry to bother you, but do you know someone named Tony Garner?" "Who? I don't know anyone by that name. Why are you calling from this number?" When I explained that I was using the cell phone of a man who had been in a bicycle accident and carried a red and black backpack, the person on the other end of the line became quite agitated. "What? This phone number belongs to my husband. He always carries a red and black backpack. But my husband's name is Andrew Diaz. Had he been living under a false name for the past 2 years? Moreover, the woman called him her husband. What is going on?" I was increasingly confused. If he was alive, why hadn't he come back to me? Why was he with another woman? The more I thought about it, the less I understood. The woman said she would come to the hospital immediately. 30 minutes later, she arrived and clung to my husband's bedside, crying out, "Andrew, Andrew, hang in there." I watched in a daze. Her voice was so loud that a nurse came in and explained that he had undergone surgery for a complicated leg fracture and was still under anesthesia, so he wouldn't wake up for a while. "I'm so glad you're safe," the woman said, relieved, wiping her tears. Then she looked at me suspiciously. "By the way, who are you? Are you a friend of his?" I took a deep breath and looked back at her. "Sorry, but that man is my husband." "What? Don't joke about such things." "I wish it were a joke." She stood up and approached me aggressively. "We have a child together. How can you say such terrible things when he's unconscious? Get out." She grabbed my shoulders and tried to push me out of the room. From her earnest expression, I felt she knew nothing either. "I'm shocked too, so please calm down and listen to me." When I showed her a photo of our family taken 2 years ago, she was shocked and agitated, but she eventually calmed down and told me her story. Her name was Bella, a very beautiful, fair-skinned 24-year-old woman. Apparently, she met my husband on a ship during a heartbroken trip overseas after a college breakup. She was comforted by him and became attracted to him, and he confessed that he fell in love with her at first sight, but he never mentioned being married. Bella continued, looking very confused. "My husband told her that no matter how much he worked, all his earnings were taken by his parents, so he fled overseas to avoid being found by them. He moved into Bella's apartment when they returned to America. He said once he paid off the debts his parents saddled him with, he would marry her officially, so they didn't register their marriage but intended to eventually. She had been completely deceived by Tony. Thinking back, I remembered my husband's deceitful and irresponsible side. During these 2 years, thinking he was dead, only the good memories came back to me due to my sense of loss. But my husband was originally irresponsible, and he had cheated and lied to me before we got married." I shared my story from 2 years ago with Bella, who seemed equally bewildered. What on earth was he thinking? We looked at each other. I suddenly remembered and took out the notebook I had seen in his backpack. When I opened it, there was something unbelievable written inside. In the meeting room rather than my husband's hospital room, the nurse came to inform us, "Your husband has woken up." When we returned to the hospital room, my husband was groaning in pain from his leg. "Honey, I'm so glad you're okay. You were in a traffic accident." "Bella, you came. I remember now. I was on my bike, and suddenly I was airborne." Upon waking up to see his young wife nearby, my husband seemed relieved. Bella, quite the actress, played the role of the caring wife well. "Have you been by my side the whole time?" "Of course, it's for my dear husband." "Thank you. I'm glad you're here." The husband who had abandoned me and our daughter for 2 years was flirting with a younger woman right in front of me. I felt a seething rage and approached to speak up. "Oh, I've been here too." My husband widened his eyes in shock, looking as if he'd seen a ghost. For a moment, we stared at each other as if time had stopped. "Annabelle, why are you here?" "The police contacted me. You left our home number registered in your cell phone." My husband's voice cracked completely, revealing his panic. I calmly spoke to him. "So you've become Andrew Diaz," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. My husband stammered, unable to form words, his face turning pale. Bella also spoke to him coldly. "You lied about being single and escaping from your parents. How could you deceive me like this?" "No, that wasn't my intention. I fell in love with you at first sight and just wanted to be with you." My husband tried to make excuses, unaware that the more he spoke, the more his lies were exposed. "That's strange," I interjected, holding up the diary. "What you wrote in your diary contradicts what you're saying." "What? You read it?" My husband tried to snatch the diary from my hand, but in his condition, he couldn't get it back. I decided to read from it. Work abroad wasn't going well, and I wanted to escape. When I met Bella, she seemed to be on a heartbreak trip, and she was easily deceived by my kind words. Her parents seemed wealthy. "If I stay with her, I can live comfortably." "You're the worst," Bella whispered, her voice trembling with anger. Moreover, I continued, "if I hire a witness to say I died at sea, I can end my marriage without paying alimony or child support." What is this all about? Realizing he couldn't talk his way out, my husband started getting angry. "How dare you read my diary? And I'm injured, you know." Bella looked at him sadly as he turned red with anger. "I can't believe I trusted and was deceived by someone like you. It's truly pathetic." "I'm sorry, but I still want to be with you. I'll divorce my wife," he pleaded. But at that moment, an older couple entered the hospital room. They were Bella's parents. "Why are Bella's parents here?" he asked, bewildered. "I called them," Bella replied coldly. "You always interfere." My husband tried to insult me, but Bella's parents began yelling at him. "How dare you deceive our daughter? We'll sue you for alimony and child support," they declared, starting to leave the room with Bella. "Bella, wait please," my husband cried pitifully. "I never want to see your face again," Bella responded, slamming the door behind her and her parents. After a moment of silence, my husband turned to me with a pleading look. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help it. I'm at my destined one. Please understand." "Oh, I see. Given the circumstances, it can't be helped," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Thinking he had convinced me, my husband brightened up and took my hand. "I knew you'd understand. You're my wife, after all. I'll come back to you. I'm sorry for the past 2 years." "Yes, I was lonely," I said, playing along. He seemed to think he had smoothly persuaded me. He stroked my hand and smirked. At that moment, a voice boomed from the doorway. "Don't be ridiculous. Do you know what Annabelle has been through? I will never forgive you." It was my father, followed by my mother. "Ha, your parents too," my husband exclaimed, his eyes wide with shock. "And my parents? Why are they all here?" In the sudden development of both sets of parents gathering in the hospital room, my husband was left gaping and wide-eyed. Everyone was furious, and it looked like they were about to pounce on him, bedridden as he was. "Annabelle, I'm sorry, let's start over. Just get them out of here." My husband terribly pleaded for help, but I held back my urge to punch him and coldly told him, "The moment you abandoned me and our daughter, our ties were severed. Starting over is out of the question." "Please don't say that. I'm injured and can't move. I need someone to help me," he whimpered. "You brought this on yourself. We will proceed with the divorce. I will also claim alimony and child support." In reality, I had held a symbolic funeral for him 2 years ago, but we had kept our marriage on paper until the 7-year mark for a missing person declaration. Now I could properly divorce him and cut all ties. "No way," he muttered, looking defeated. "Also, I informed the police. The hired witness who claimed you died at sea will be caught too. You should prepare yourself." "I feel sick. Call a doctor." "Not the police," he said, feigning weakness and trying to look pitiful. He had a habit of lying to escape when things didn't go his way. "Take responsibility for your own mess," my father-in-law shouted at my husband. Even as he continued to look up at me with pleading eyes, I responded with a smile. "Thank you for being alive, so please make sure to pay the alimony and child support." Realizing there was no one left to save him, he covered himself with a blanket and started crying. After that, I officially divorced my husband. His parents paid $330,000 in alimony and $100,000 in child support upfront. Bella also reported being deceived to the police. His parents paid her for alimony and child support as well. My husband was arrested and went to jail. When he gets out, he'll have to work hard to repay his parents, watched by strict relatives to prevent escape. It will take him a long time to repay his debts. I moved back to my parents' house and started living happily with my daughter. Now, every morning, my daughter says, "Grandpa, Grandma, I'm off to school," and heads to daycare. To protect my daughter's smiling face as she grows, I will continue to do my best. How did you find this story? Please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. I apologize for the behavior of my mother-in-law, who openly berated me in front of our relatives during my father-in-law's 60th birthday celebration. She not only called me unattractive but also incompetent, making me feel humiliated and ashamed. Where was my supportive husband, always so attentive? Was he taking care of our daughter? He was nowhere to be found. As soon as I arrived at my in-laws' house, feeling perfectly fine, my mother-in-law suddenly complained of severe back pain and became unable to move. She handed over all the party preparation work to me. Later, she continued to belittle me in front of the guests who had come to celebrate my father-in-law, turning what should have been a joyous occasion into a somber one. Then my father-in-law stood up and broke the tense silence with a single phrase that triggered a series of unimaginable events. "Is that all you have to say?" I'm Sarah, 35 years old. 6 years ago, I married my husband Michael, who is 3 years younger than me. We have a 5-year-old daughter. My mother-in-law seemed displeased with me since I was older than her son. Whenever I visited her house during holidays, she made sarcastic remarks in my husband's absence. I wish I had a younger, more vibrant daughter-in-law, not someone with age spots like you. Do I really look that old? I would ask. Yes, very. Don't you see your own face in the mirror every day? It hurt to be criticized about my appearance, but I thought it best not to make a big deal out of it since we only met a few times a year. However, this seemed to irritate her more, leading to harsher words. You're quite thick-skinned for an old woman. You don't get upset no matter what I say. I find it annoying that you don't show a shred of modesty. What could I say to my mother-in-law who only spoke words that left me at a loss? In front of my husband, she hid her true nature and spoke kindly to me. He seemed unaware of her mistreatment, and if I vented my frustrations, I would likely be blamed, so I held back. Visiting her house felt burdensome, but this was a significant celebration for my kind father-in-law's 60th birthday. Many relatives were gathering for a grand event, so I decided to attend. My father-in-law is a quiet man who subtly shows kindness. When I'm feeling down due to my mother-in-law's harsh words, he gently approaches me and says, "Sarah, if you're having a hard time, feel free to tell me. If it's all right, I'd like to be there for you." I wondered if he knew about my harassment, but to protect me from further mistreatment, he refrained from openly supporting me. To celebrate my warm-hearted father-in-law, our family left early in the morning and drove 3 hours to their house. I was feeling under the weather with a low-grade fever and lingering fatigue, so Michael did all the driving. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law greeted us cheerfully. Well, look who's here. It's been a while, Michael. You should visit more often. Bagheer, you look tired. I've been driving non-stop, so it can't be helped, Michael replied. I see you've worked hard. I'll get the bed ready. Why don't you go rest in the back room? I think I'll take you up on that. Sarah, you should rest too. You've been taking care of the kid in the car, and you don't seem well. Bagheer, Michael, didn't you know? I called Sarah yesterday, and we plan to go shopping together for the celebration. You go and rest, Sarah. Once you put the luggage down, we'll head out. No such communication had occurred. Exhausted from looking after our energetic 5-year-old daughter, I wanted to rest too. Since Sarah's not feeling well, let her rest. You can do the shopping, Michael suggested. But it's your father's big celebration. I want to choose the best ingredients with Sarah. Sarah, you'll keep your promise, right? She left me no room to refuse, forcefully pulling me back into the car. She glared at me and snapped, I don't think you need time to rest. Then she smiled brightly and said loudly, thank you for driving. I'm so happy. Knowing that opposing her would ruin the day, I reluctantly got into the driver's seat. I'm fine, Michael. You rest. I'll go shopping with her. As I tried to hand over our daughter to Michael, my mother-in-law took her and seated her in the child's seat. Looking after the child is a mother's duty. Well, Michael, we're off. Once in the passenger seat, she began berating me. You can't even look after your child properly. Stop using Michael for your convenience. You're just an incompetent daughter-in-law who's only aged. Her sweet facade remained as she waved goodbye to Michael, who remained oblivious. I drove my husband's unfamiliar car toward a large supermarket. Of course, my mother-in-law couldn't stay quiet during the drive. She began lecturing me right away. I'll make you regret lazing around while making my son drive. Mother-in-law, please don't say such scary things. I've been feeling feverish and fatigued since this morning. Your poor health is due to your bad management. Also, your crow's feet have increased and the spots on your cheeks have darkened. I can't even bear to look at you. Your skin has lost its elasticity. I had no energy to respond to her harsh words and barely managed to nod along until we arrived at the supermarket. I wondered how other daughters-in-law managed to endure such treatment from their mothers-in-law. My high-spirited mother-in-law jumped out of the car without a word of thanks and swiftly handed me 2 shopping carts. You're so slow. Get a move on. When I tried to avoid the crowds, she swiftly moved forward, filling the shopping basket with luxury foods like USDA prime beef, crab, salmon roe, and melons. Then she started adding items that were clearly not needed for the day. Mother-in-law, do we need these urgently? I asked. We're bulk buying so we don't have to come to the supermarket again and again. You should know that without being told, she replied. Feeling helpless, I let her do as she pleased. By the time we finished shopping, the 2 carts were piled high. We're going to check out. Hurry up. Stop dawdling. Despite her rush when it came time to pay at the counter, my mother-in-law showed no intention of taking out her wallet. Mother-in-law, the payment. I began, but with her arms folded, she didn't move an inch. You should pay for everything, she said coldly. Excuse me, I stammered. As a wife, it's your duty to entertain your husband's father. Don't be stingy and just pay. I ended up having to pay a total of $300 at the cash register to avoid making a scene. Not having any cash on me, I paid with my credit card. As a part-time worker trying to raise a child, this was a significant blow to my finances. To make matters worse, I had brought $300 as a birthday gift for my father-in-law's 60th birthday, but I couldn't use that now. This expense meant I would have to cut back even more on our living costs in the future, and the burden that was already heavy became even heavier. I wondered how I should tell this to Michael. If I reported it, my mother-in-law might cause a fuss. During the car ride home, she kept hurling insults at me. It was almost impressive how many different ways she could insult me. By the time we arrived home, my husband was still asleep, probably due to exhaustion. Upon seeing this, my mother-in-law smiled slightly and began to take advantage of me. After you put away the groceries, go weed the garden right away. Please, can I rest a bit? I pleaded. You have no right to defy your mother-in-law. This is the consequence of making Michael drive alone. So this is what you want, I murmured. If you have time to move your mouth, just go and move your hands. Hurry up, we're short on time. After weeding, clean the bathroom and the toilet. Despite the unfairness of the situation, I had no choice but to endure it for the day. I weeded the garden and then cleaned the grimy, yellow-stained bathroom and toilet. I thought that once the 60th birthday celebration was over, I wouldn't have to see my mother-in-law for a while. My husband woke up just as I had finished cleaning and looked surprised to see me. Sarah, are you okay? If you're not feeling well, don't overwork yourself. Take a break now. Thank you, I'll take you up on that offer. As I was about to lie down, my mother-in-law suddenly let out a loud yell, clutching her back. Although she had been lively just moments before, she started complaining about sudden back pain. My mother-in-law, who always presented a gentle demeanor in front of my husband, suddenly let out a weak voice. This is troublesome. My back hurts so much I can't do anything. My chronic back pain has flared up again. I will be able to cook before the relatives gather. Sarah, you're my only hope. But, oh, what should I do? As much as her sorrowful demeanor seemed staged, if her chronic back pain was genuine, it would indeed be impossible for her to stand in the kitchen. Reluctantly, I pushed my worried body, asked my husband to look after our daughter, and started cooking. Sarah, are you sure you're okay? Michael asked. I'm fine. I always cook, remember? I put on a brave front for my husband, but my body was already fatigued. It was an important day for my father-in-law, and I felt that I couldn't afford to take a break. My head was spinning, and somehow the smell of food was making me sick, but I had to keep going for my father-in-law. After I managed to finish cooking, my father-in-law came into the kitchen to check on me. You've worked hard. Thank you for preparing all this food. Not at all. It's for you. Please enjoy it later. After that, the relatives started gathering one after another, everyone wishing my father-in-law well, creating a lively atmosphere. As we finished the toast and were about to start eating, my mother-in-law started saying something shocking. I'm sorry, everyone, but due to my chronic back pain flaring up on this important birthday celebration, the food was all cooked by my daughter-in-law. I apologize for the unappetizing food made by my unattractive daughter-in-law. Both my father-in-law and husband froze at my mother-in-law's sudden outburst. My daughter-in-law is not only unattractive, but she's also clumsy. A total failure. It's truly pitiful. Ouch. My mother-in-law exaggeratedly rubbed her back, continuing to disparage me. She's so clumsy that without my support, she can't do anything. I wonder if she can even take care of her own child. I'm so worried about whether Michael can manage with such a woman as his wife. What was supposed to be a festive atmosphere quickly turned gloomy, resembling more of a wake than a celebration. My usually supportive husband, who was supposed to be looking after our daughter, was nowhere to be found. At that moment, my father-in-law, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up. Is that all you wanted to say? Ha! Seems like it. Maybe we should kick out the useless one then. Following his words, my husband entered the room holding our daughter in a suitcase, his face unusually stern. Dad, as you said, I've packed her stuff. My mother-in-law smiled at the sight, seemingly pleased. Sarah, looks like you're getting kicked out. But to her surprise, my husband handed the suitcase to her. What? My father-in-law's booming voice added the final blow. Take that and get out of this house right away. Although she seemed unable to comprehend what was happening, my mother-in-law quickly understood the situation. Why should I be the one kicked out? It's Sarah who's useless. The bathroom is always covered in mold, the toilet left dirty, and you call Sarah useless when you barely cook anything, not to mention how harshly you've been treating her. I've had enough. It's the mother-in-law's duty to discipline the daughter-in-law. I was only pointing out her shortcomings. Discipline? What era do you think we're living in? Realizing that her angry father-in-law wouldn't take her side, my mother-in-law turned to her usual theatrics and began crying to my husband. Michael, don't misunderstand. We might need to take care of your father someday, right? So I was teaching Sarah how to be a good wife. As tough as that was. Take care of him. That's a laugh. I won't be fooled by you anymore. You've just been bullying Sarah. Even today, despite feeling unwell, she came along to celebrate Dad's 60th birthday. Sarah volunteered to celebrate, didn't she? Don't lie, you also made her pay for the groceries, didn't you? I found the receipt from today in her bag when she was trying to take out candies for our daughter. It shows that Sarah paid with her credit card. I just asked her to pay because I didn't have any cash on hand. I was planning to pay her back honestly. Really? If I hadn't noticed, you would have just kept quiet. I've turned a blind eye to the common mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issues, but you're going too far. I'm fed up with living with a spiteful old woman. Seeing my husband and father-in-law turn away from her, my mother-in-law began to blame me with all her usual theatrics, tears streaming down her face. No, I haven't said anything, but it's a fact that you've been bullying me, isn't it? For the sake of my father-in-law and my husband, who had gone to great lengths for me, I gathered the courage and spoke the truth for the first time. I would no longer let my mother-in-law have her way. That's right, we heard about it from Mia. We also know about the nasty comments you made about Sarah at the supermarket and in the car. Afterwards, you made Sarah do all the weeding and cleaning the bathroom and the toilet. Yeah, Grandma was mean to Mommy. She made her clean a lot of places. You can't trust what a child says. Maya doesn't lie. Let's check the dash cam footage. That should clear everything up. Michael, could you do that? Good idea, Sarah. I'll do that right away. What? What is that? Ignoring his mother's question, Michael went to the car parked outside, started the engine, and began playing the dash cam footage. The latest device, which could also record the inside of the car, was installed, so even facial expressions were clear. Ah, it's showing she was saying these things. I'm shocked. Everyone come over here and watch this. Relatives who had followed to see what was happening all checked the footage. Upon doing so, they began to comment. This is terrible indeed. Wow, this is the worst. Mother-in-law, who had stayed in the house insisting she wasn't at fault, began to panic as the atmosphere grew tense and ran barefoot toward the car. Everyone was taken aback by her swift movements despite her supposed back pain. So the back pain was just an act then? I'm all better now, she said, casually responding to my words. She tried to awkwardly seat herself in the driver's seat to turn off the dash cam. But she was firmly held by my father-in-law, making it impossible for her to move. Stop this right now. Don't look, she screamed, but no amount of pleading could help her. With all her misdeeds exposed, my mother-in-law, stunned and speechless, sank down helplessly. That's when my father-in-law casually handed her a single piece of paper. I filled in my part. You just need to write your part and submit it. What? Isn't this a divorce form? I had it prepared just in case. I never thought I'd have to use it. Don't have her cross my doorstep again. Wait a minute. I promise to stop. I promise. Sarah, please forgive me. The sight of my mother-in-law begging for forgiveness with tears in her eyes was truly pitiful, but this too was likely an act. I firmly pushed my mother-in-law away. You let the cat out of the bag about bullying your daughter-in-law. In the end, I will never forgive you. You might want to leave before the neighbors gather around. Oh no, this is terrible. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors who watched from a distance. Perhaps not wanting to make a scene, she promptly took the divorce form and suitcase, and her supposed back pain was nowhere to be found. She rushed out of the garden. The villain had been dealt with, but our home filled with guilt. I'm sorry for all this during your 60th birthday celebration, Dad. When I earnestly apologized, he responded, Sarah, you did nothing wrong. I'm sorry for all the trouble we've caused. Let's start over. My father-in-law smiled. and the relatives also watched with kind expressions. Later, they praised the dishes I had prepared and ate heartily. At that moment, all the fatigue seemed to fly away. Thus, we celebrated my father-in-law's 60th birthday in a grand manner. My mother-in-law, who was initially reluctant to agree to the divorce, eventually agreed, and they divorced amicably. It was also revealed that she had been misappropriating funds from my father-in-law's account, and she was ordered to repay $10,000 that she had spent recklessly. Unable to find work due to her lack of experience, she now works as a janitor in an office building late at night. With barely any money left, she lives in a rundown apartment that's seen better days. On the other hand, I found out that I was pregnant with my second child. It seemed that the feeling of discomfort I had earlier was due to my pregnancy. 5 months have passed since then, and my husband Michael has been very caring. The ultrasound revealed that we're expecting a boy. Both Michael and my father-in-law are looking forward to his arrival, already excited. My father-in-law sent over blue baby clothes. My adorable daughter is overjoyed at the thought of having a younger brother and practices taking care of a baby with her dolls every day. Watching her gives me immense happiness. Long before this unsettling time, I'd often visited my son's house. One day, I found my 10-year-old grandson, who should have run away, chained up. As I rushed to help him, he said my daughter-in-law, who was supposed to be deceased, was there. "Your mom passed away," I replied, confused. Following my grandson's instructions, I opened the floor to find my deceased daughter-in-law lying there. Panic seized me as the unimaginable unfolded. Soon, a series of horrifying truths emerged. A year ago, after my husband passed away, I lived alone. My son's family was just a 30-minute walk away, so I didn't feel lonely, especially since my grandson Ron often rode his bike to visit me. "Grandma, look, I got a perfect score on my math test," he would proudly announce. His kindness and intelligence always charmed me. My son, Simon, at 34, was a company employee with a degree in economics. He seemed busy, which I took as a sign of his hard work. His wife, Lily, often visited me, and I was grateful for her concern. "Mom, you should go on an overseas cruise," she suggested half a year ago. My son then surprised me with a 2-week trip, wanting to cheer me up after my husband's passing. "Oh my, what a thoughtful gesture. Thank you," I exclaimed, joyfully planning the trip with my friends. However, Lily passed away a week ago, and the funeral had already taken place when I returned with souvenirs. Shocked, I learned from my son at the doorstep that it was so sudden they had a private funeral. "No way," I gasped, trying to peek inside the house, but my son blocked my view. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to enjoy your trip," he said. "Did you inform her parents?" "What about Ron?" I asked, bombarding him with questions. My son frowned and replied, "I've contacted her parents. Ron is in shock, so please leave him alone." I couldn't believe Lily was gone. "Can I come in?" I asked, but my son glared at me. "Stop thinking only about yourself. You're really persistent," he yelled, shoving me into the street. Feeling deeply ashamed, I apologized and decided to leave, regretting not forcing my way in then. Something terrible was already happening. The next day, I decided to call my son to offer help instead of showing up unannounced. But he didn't answer, possibly busy with work. I wanted to visit Lily's grave and check on Ron, but didn't want to burden my son. After several unanswered calls, I left a message asking if I could visit the next day. Still no call back, so I decided to call once more. After a few rings, my son answered with an irritated tone. "Why are you calling so much? I've got a lot going on here." "Why?" "Because I'm worried about you and my grandson." By the way, Ron ran away. He left a note saying, "I'm following Mom," I said, horrified. "Oh no. Did you call the police?" I asked. Of course, I called them immediately. I'm terribly worried about Ron. He must be lonely after losing his mother. "Oh, please come back," my son replied. My hand grew cold and numb as I held the phone. "I'll look for him too," I said. "He'll come back eventually, so you don't need to do anything," my son shouted, then hung up. I began to doubt whether he was really looking for Ron. That night, I couldn't sleep, constantly worrying. As the sky began to lighten, I made a decision. Better to walk around searching for Ron than doing nothing. More searches would be better. I headed to the police station as soon as the inquiry desk opened at 8:30. "My grandson ran away, and you're searching for him, right? Any leads?" I asked the officer. To my shock, they said no search request had been filed. "What? That can't be, I stammered, stunned, remembering my son's evasive answers. He's hiding something. Faking the officer, I immediately went to my son's house. I rang the doorbell, but there was no response as he was likely already at work. Using my spare key, I let myself in. From the back, I heard noises. Did he leave the TV on? Curiously, I headed towards the sound, finding my grandson chained in the kitchen storage space. Ron, what happened to you? I rushed to him and hugged him. Grandma, please help Mom first. He pointed to the floor storage nearby with his chin. But your mom is gone, right? The funeral was held. No, Mom is here. Please hurry, he pleaded, panic-stricken, crying, and kicking to get closer. His frantic expression made me realize something was seriously wrong. Fearfully, I opened the floor storage. No, Lily. There lay my daughter-in-law, mouth gagged, hands and feet bound with tape, dried up and lifeless. It's all Dad's fault, Mom. Seeing his changed mother, my grandson screamed and cried. I hugged him and immediately called an ambulance. The operator arranged for the police and rescue team to cut the chains, and both Ron and Lily were rushed to the hospital. In the ambulance, my sobbing grandson explained what had happened. What a horrible thing. I'll make sure he pays for this, Ron. Grandma will see to it. Listening to him, I vowed to bring justice for my grandson and daughter-in-law. Later, with the police, I heard more details in the hospital room. My son had been away for about a week. After Ron fell asleep, I asked the nurse to look after him and went straight to a lawyer's office, determined to expose my son's crimes. 8 days after finding Lily and Ron, I was sitting in my son's living room when I heard the front door open, signaling my son's return home. Mom, dressed in casual clothes, he looked surprised to see me. Then my son quickly glanced toward the kitchen. Of course, you'd be concerned about the kitchen where you chained a 10-year-old child. When I glared at him, Simon looked startled. Chained? What are you talking about? You mean the toy handcuffs he was playing with? His flustered and lame excuse made me feel nauseous. Enough with the lies. You left a 10-year-old alone for over a week. You said Ron ran away from home, didn't you? I accused sternly. Simon's eyes darted around, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen. He did run away, but the police found him. Liar, you didn't even file a missing person report. I confirmed it myself. I stood up from the chair with a bang and yelled, making my son wince and fall silent. But Lily's gone, and I have to work for the sake of the kid left behind, he mumbled, sneaking glances to check if the floor hatch was open. That's completely different from what Ron told me. Just as I started speaking, my son shouted, Enough already, you old hag. Haven't you finished menopause? He raised his voice, interrupting me, and tried to drag me out of the house. I found your dried-up wife under the floor you keep glancing at. I know everything. I pushed his hand away with all my strength, my hair disheveled as I screamed. Simon paled at my words. In fact, I had heard the full story from my grandson on the day I found Ron and Lily. Ron had been on a 5-day camp until the day before I returned. When he came back full of memories, Simon told him, Mom has passed away. No matter what Ron asked, Simon didn't answer and blocked the kitchen with a partition, preventing access. My grandson cried, I want to see Mom. I want to see Grandma. But Simon only yelled, Shut up. When I visited Simon's house right after returning, Ron heard the doorbell and was thrilled. Grandma's here. He tried to run to the door, but Simon gagged him and held him down. You told her you weren't here when your mom died, so the police suspect you. If you don't want to get caught, stay hidden. Simon threatened. Ron must have been terrified, shocked by his father's words. My grandson hid in his room, holding his breath. Unaware of this, I believed Simon and went home after being shoved into the street. That night, Ron heard rustling sounds from the kitchen. Curious, he sneaked a look through a gap in the partition and found his bound and gagged mother in the floor storage. He shouted, Mom, in shock, which got Simon's attention. Simon chained Ron and shoved him into the storage space. Ron heard Simon muttering, I thought she'd be dead after 3 days. This revealed that Lily had been without food or water for 5 days, mummifying in the floor storage. That's just a made-up story by him, Simon claimed. Ron is lying because he's in his rebellious phase. Then why was she mummified? Actually, Lily had a high fever and died suddenly. I loved her and couldn't let go, so I kept her at home. Simon lowered his head, wiping fake tears. I approached him quietly. Mom, my son reached out for comfort, but I grabbed a stack of papers from his nearby bag and hit him hard on the head. Don't be ridiculous. You neglected your child for over a week and went on an affair trip. That's your idea of love? The stack of papers was evidence of my son's infidelity. His computer was full of emails and photos with his mistress, and gifts and luxurious dinners were all documented in the photos. Where did you get those? Frantically trying to hide the papers, he looked pathetic. I found this account book in your closet. I slammed a bank book on the table, making Simon's face twitch. The bank book showed transfers totaling $200,000 over 3 months, way too much for a salary. You said you were in accounting, but this is embezzlement. Ha! This is a bonus, he spat back. It's too early for you to go see now. That's not true. A strong voice came from the next room. Simon looked in shock as a tall, middle-aged man stepped out. Ollie, yes, he was Ollie, the head of accounting at Simon's company. After finding Lily and consulting with the police, I also discussed the suspicious transfers with the manager. The company was aware of the unusual transactions and was already investigating. Ollie had called to check on us, and I informed him about Simon's return. Instead of calling the police, I called Ollie, who offered to accompany me for safety. You've let me down, Ollie said, standing with folded arms and glaring at Simon. Everyone makes mistakes, but a crime is inexcusable, even once. What? Simon told me he was an exceptional employee, I asked, confused by the contradiction. No, he makes many mistakes and tries to blame female colleagues. I was stunned and looked at Simon, who avoided eye contact. Still, I believed he had potential. Embezzlement is unforgivable. Spending stolen money on your mistress. What a disgrace. Shrinking under our combined scolding, Simon suddenly raised his head and started speaking boldly. Embezzlement and infidelity were wrong, but I couldn't accept Lily's sudden death. I wanted her close, so I put her under the floor, he claimed, sobbing theatrically. Stop lying, I interrupted. Lily is alive. When I revealed this, my son's eyes widened in horror, his fake tears now obvious. Thanks to the doctors, Lily survived. She and Ron both gave statements to the police that matched. She discovered Simon's bank book and was attacked when she tried to contact the company. Remembering her trembling during her statement made my anger flare up again. Our company values customer trust above all. We cannot tolerate this. You're fired. The manager's low, powerful voice made Simon tear up. What you did is unforgivable. You're cut off. You won't see your wife or child again, I declared, visibly shaking Simon. What? Fired and cut off? How am I supposed to live? Help me, Mom, Simon cried, clinging to me. Go cry in the bathroom. I pushed away my son as the police sirens signaled the arrival of officers called before Ollie's appearance. Am I really getting arrested? I just wanted to impress a younger woman, Simon cried out. I handed him over to the police, shooing him away. After that, my son was arrested. The lawyer predicts that due to embezzling company funds, he might spend about 10 years in prison. Lily divorced him immediately and demanded $200,000 in alimony and child support. I hope he spends his life in poverty and loneliness, darker than the space under the floorboards. On the other hand, Lily has fully recovered, and Ron is doing well too. Feeling responsible for my son's actions, I offered to support their living expenses, but Lily firmly refused, saying she would work instead. She asked me to help take care of Ron, which feels like a reward to be able to spend time with my adorable grandson at such an easy-to-handle age. Lily started working as an insurance agent and amazingly became the top salesperson nationwide. I will continue to watch over both of them with all my heart. How did you find this story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. I sit at a fancy restaurant where I was supposedly invited, staring at the lonely glass of water placed before me while other family members enjoy their courses. Feeding you too after you just invited yourself along. You should be grateful for water, my mother-in-law says, adding, the water here is really good, you know, because it's a fancy place. It tastes amazing. My name is Chloe. I started working for a major company right out of college and have been busting my tail in sales ever since. My parents always nag me about getting married whenever we meet. Finally giving in to their tearful pleas, I reluctantly joined a matchmaking service. At 37, I met Ricky, who's 5 years younger, and we tied the knot. Just when I thought this would put my parents at ease, an unexpected trial hit us. Ricky's company went under due to an economic downturn. Thankfully, we both work, and I have enough savings to get us through. I encouraged Ricky to stay home and take care of the household until he finds another job. His housework skills aren't great, but it's a relief to have someone manage the home while I support him. I occasionally put in overtime to revamp sales materials and earn more in performance bonuses, but months go by and Ricky shows no sign of wanting to work again. I suggested, "How about you start working part-time?" Ricky declined, saying it wasn't viable for his future. He started getting irritated whenever I inquired about his job search. He might be relaxed because he is still getting unemployment benefits, but it keeps me anxious while his endless job hunt continues. Eventually, Ricky started saying, "Give me money." It seems he's burned through all his savings from when he was single. I don't know how much he had, but his lifestyle did seem pretty extravagant. After becoming a stay-at-home husband, he'd buy indoor exercise equipment because he had time, or bring home trending video games. If it's like this just from what I see, he must have been reckless with his spending. But now, with his unemployment benefits gone, I'm the one supporting us. In exchange for Ricky taking on the household chores, I've been covering most of the expenses, from rent to utilities, groceries, and daily necessities, out of my paycheck. Yet I can't afford to give more. I don't get any compensation for housework, Ricky argues. I don't have a single dollar for myself. Can't you give me a bonus once in a while? Fed up, I snap back at him. I don't have an allowance either, and I really can't give more. I get why you want a full-time job, but just get any job for now, even part-time. We can't keep going like this. Our arguments over money have become frequent, but they always end in a stalemate. Eventually, Ricky started receiving financial help from his parents, which strained my relationship with them. Visiting his parents, my mother-in-law preaches, a woman should silently support her husband, make more money, and let my son be free. This has only driven a wedge further between me and his parents. One evening, Ricky surprises me by suggesting that we go out to eat. Apparently, his parents made reservations at a high-end local restaurant rumored to be a hidden gem. He happily tells me he's made reservations for 4, including his parents. I cautiously ask if he can afford such a fancy place. Then Ricky looked away for a moment and began to speak. Actually, it turns out I've secretly taken a part-time job. He explained that it was a short daytime shift, and given our past arguments about him working full-time, he didn't know how to tell me. So, in part to apologize for all that happened, I've reserved this nice restaurant, he said. I was touched. If that's the case, I'll happily accept the invitation, I responded. I had many questions about his workplace and job, but Ricky said we'd talk about it at dinner, keeping the details vague. Nonetheless, for the first time in a while, a cheerful subject had lightened the mood between us. But days later, in a quaint private room at the restaurant, I would find out the real reason for the dinner and shake with anger. From the moment we arrived, something seemed off. The restaurant staff looked slightly surprised to see us and whispered something to my mother-in-law, who led the way and simply smiled, urging them to show us to our room. Once inside, she designated seats for everyone. My seat was, as always, closest to the entrance, a family rule. Regardless of whether the meal was Ricky's way of apologizing or not, I obediently took my seat. Then the first dish arrived, and that's when things got strange. The waiter halted, looking troubled as he entered the room. My mother-in-law gestured toward my father-in-law with a rarely seen elegance, saying, "He is first, then me, followed by our son. I can't wait to see what courses we'll get." Relieved, the waiter then served the dishes in that order. Father-in-law, mother-in-law, Ricky. As they started explaining the dishes one by one, it finally dawned on me that my meal hadn't come yet. I decided to speak up after the waiter finished explaining. "Excuse me, I haven't received my food yet." In front of me, all I had was water, courtesy of my mother-in-law. "Water will be just fine for her," she said. The waiter's eyes widened as he began to say something, but my mother-in-law cut him off, laughing. "Oh, Flo, you're so audacious. A daughter-in-law is a stranger in the family. You think it's okay to come uninvited to our family dinner and then demand a meal? Water is more than sufficient for a woman as rude and clueless as you. And hey, this is fancy water from a fancy restaurant. You should appreciate it." I didn't have a problem with only having water since I wanted to enjoy the food's flavor anyway, but this was simply outrageous. My mother-in-law then hustled the flustered waiter near the entrance, telling him to leave the room and adding insult to injury. "Pay $1,000 for that water. You don't get the chance to drink water at such a nice place often, so consider it a bargain for the time you're spending in this lovely room. Feel free to take your time until we are done eating." I felt a surge of anger boiling up from the pit of my stomach. I glanced at Ricky, hoping he'd say something, but he just continued eating, unfazed. My father-in-law was no better, sipping his drink as if he hadn't heard a thing. It dawned on me that they planned to stick me with the bill from the beginning. I felt utterly defeated. I had been genuinely happy when Ricky got a part-time job and said he'd treat me with his salary, but that was all a lie to lure me into this harassment. I was so fed up that I even found it foolish to get angry. Fine, I agreed. I'll pay for the water and leave first. Please enjoy your time as a family. As I left the room to settle the bill, I could hear their crass laughter echoing into the hallway. The observant waiter noticed my exit and mentioned that although he couldn't serve the pre-ordered course meal, he could prepare other dishes. I thanked him for his kindness but said I'd only pay for the water and leave. Then the waiter told me the water was free, so I promptly left the restaurant. Seeing Ricky's behavior today solidified my decision to divorce him. For a long time, Ricky was jobless and hardly attended any interviews. Once he found out there'd be no money, he conspired with his parents to blame me. Today's series of harassment was the last straw. I no longer felt any shred of love and knew I couldn't continue being married to him. As soon as I got home, I started packing, intent on leaving everything else behind. My new life would have no trace of Ricky. Reflecting on it, our home was filled with Ricky's hobbies, and I didn't have much stuff of my own anyway. I had been saving money ever since Ricky's business went under, not knowing how long we'd be financially strained. I dragged the large suitcase I'd used during my college travels and headed to the hotel where I would stay for the night. The next morning, I felt incredibly refreshed as I ate the hotel breakfast before heading to work. It had been ages since I'd enjoyed a breakfast like this. Usually, it's just a slice of toast with no jam or butter due to my tight budget. I was impressed at how hotel services have improved recently. On my way to work, I stopped by the city office to pick up divorce papers from the after-hours window. Although only my part had been filled out, my spirits lifted surprisingly high now that I had decided to divorce. It seemed to have been much more miserable in this marriage than I'd initially thought. Shortly after arriving at the office and starting work, I noticed a commotion in the neighboring department. As I continued to work, chatting with a colleague sitting next to me and wondering what was going on, the noise slowly but surely moved closer until it reached our department. "Hey Chloe, get out here. You think you can run away just because you didn't come home? Mom and Dad say they'll forgive you if you come out now and apologize." I stood up, shocked. I couldn't believe Ricky and my in-laws were actually standing at the entrance of my office. As soon as they saw me, their faces turned even more hostile and they approached me directly. My mother-in-law throws a receipt from last night's dinner at me. "I told you to pay $1,000 for the water, didn't I? You, the wife of my son, have set a trap for us." What a disgrace. Ignoring the attention from around, Ricky and my mother-in-law yelled at me. While they were doing this, my father-in-law looked around the room with an "I'm not involved" expression just as he had the day before. I was astounded that they would go to such lengths, even taking time off to harass me like this. But no matter how aggressively they pushed, I had no intention of giving in. If I'm a stranger to your family, why should I pay for the meal? I don't appreciate being harassed at my workplace. If you keep disrupting, I'll call the police. Upon realizing that I wasn't going to pay, Ricky suddenly lifted a computer monitor from a nearby desk. My mother-in-law, seeing this, picked up a phone and said, "We'll show you what happens when you defy us," and slammed it on the floor. Screams and commotion spread among the female staff, throwing the room into chaos. As I worked up the courage, my mother-in-law and Ricky began hurling things with their flushed faces. My father-in-law finally spoke. "If Chloe had just paid up, none of this would have happened. Sorry for causing you all trouble. She can clean all this up." He chuckled and apologized to the room, but the strangeness of his demeanor, acting as if nothing was wrong even when his family was breaking office equipment, became even more evident. People started to move away from him, avoiding any contact. I knew I had to do something. I yelled at Ricky and his gang to stop this chaos. Trying to have a conversation with people so enraged was like talking to a wall. Just as I desperately grabbed Ricky's arm to get him to listen, police officers burst into the room. Apparently, someone from the next department over had called the cops when they started throwing office supplies around. Ricky glared at me. "You called the cops?" he yelled and punched me in the face. Immediately, 3 officers surrounded him, tackling him to the ground. It was like a scene out of a TV drama. They arrested him on the spot for assault. Later that day, the company's CEO, myself, and Ricky's parents all ended up at the police station. The company filed a report for the damaged property. I consulted a lawyer about the harassment I'd been facing, but proving some aspects like what happened at the restaurant and Ricky's refusal to contribute financially was tough. My lawyer suggested settling. Negotiations got complicated when Ricky lawyered up. Eventually, we agreed to a divorce with no division of assets and a payment for emotional distress due to Ricky's workplace violence. Meanwhile, the assault case wrapped up in 2 quick months, and I received compensation for my injuries. As for the damages to the company, taking legal action wouldn't yield much money and would be time-consuming. More importantly, the company wanted to avoid negative attention, so they opted to settle out of court rather than file a lawsuit. In the end, they promised to pay a large settlement instead. Ricky was the only one with a criminal record, but he and his parents owed a large sum of money to me and the company. They somehow covered it with their retirement funds, leaving them practically broke. In a desperate move, his parents called Ricky back home and, through family connections, got him a job at another company. But that didn't last long either. His new employer, unbeknownst to them, had business with my company. By the time their CEO heard the full story, rumors about Ricky's volatile and dangerous behavior had already spread. Encouraged by the boss who valued the company's image, Ricky decided to quit his job. Maybe he was already uncomfortable. Suddenly, Ricky moved back home and quit his new job. Rumors started in the neighborhood and eventually reached my in-laws' workplace, revealing Ricky's criminal past. Not only were they subject to criticism for harassment, but they were also known as dangerous people who broke into their daughter-in-law's workplace and destroyed property. When this story spread from colleagues to bosses, both of my in-laws were fired despite being close to retirement. They started to reach out for help through a lawyer. I told the lawyer I didn't need any more reports and realized there's no need to rush into marriage. Fortunately, my parents have stopped pushing me to get married. Maybe they feel guilty about something because of this incident, but they've stopped even mentioning the word. I feel bad for my parents, but it's better this way. Now, I'm focusing on contributing to the company that I've troubled. I've been assigned new projects and am enjoying the most fulfilling days of my life. Hey sis, why didn't you come to mom's funeral? What? I can't believe my own sister wouldn't even come to her mother's funeral. You're so cold-hearted. It's awful, just awful. That's not something a decent person would do. I was bewildered by the sudden phone call from my sister. Our mother had passed away 3 years ago, and we had already held a proper funeral. I had no idea what my sister was talking about. I'm married now, and my husband and I are both working. We've been blessed with children, and we make sure to give them extra love and attention so they don't feel lonely. My husband is incredibly supportive with both housework and childcare, and I'm proud of our ideal family. I have a strong desire to ensure my children never experience the same things I did. My parents divorced when I was in elementary school due to my mother's affair. My father discovered the affair because I told him. Though it's often believed that children will always side with their mother, that wasn't the case for me. My mother was far from the ideal maternal figure. I have no memories of being loved by her. I have one younger sister, but our mother only doted on her. It seemed that even spending time on housework was a waste to her, so all the chores were forced on me. My mother despised me for revealing her affair and hated me even more. She constantly berated me, leaving me with physical and emotional scars. When the divorce was finalized, she took my sister and left. Thanks to my father and grandparents, I maintained a relationship with my sister, seeing her regularly. But as I entered middle school, those meetings became less frequent. I thought it was due to adult issues, but it turned out my sister was avoiding me. After being turned down a few times, I asked if I had done something to upset her. My sister told me that our mother had said the family fell apart because of me. From their perspective, I was the traitor. My sister believed that if she continued seeing me, she would be the next to be abandoned. She couldn't bear to contact or meet me behind our mother's back anymore and wanted me to stop. I explained that our mother had betrayed us first by cheating on our father, causing our family to fall apart. My sister knew about the affair but held it against me for being the one who told our father. Even though she understood, she still saw me as the traitor since she had to live with our mother. She wouldn't listen, insisting it was my fault for not turning a blind eye. During all this, my father remarried, and I got a new stepmother. At first, it was awkward, but she tried her best to be an ideal mother figure. Seeing her efforts, I decided to cherish my new family. I stopped contacting my sister and we eventually drifted apart. I had no lingering feelings for my biological mother, who only loved my sister. I went to college and secured a job. Just when I thought I could finally repay my father and stepmother, my father passed away in an accident. Despite our distance, I informed my sister that our father, who was still her father, had passed away. However, my sister did not offer any words of condolence. After saying, "Serves him right," she laughed scornfully. I thought she would still come to the funeral, but my biological mother and sister never showed up. However, when we discussed my father's inheritance later, they suddenly appeared. Everyone was taken aback by their flashy and inappropriate attire and heavy makeup, which made them barely recognizable. "At least tell us the date for deciding the inheritance. We had to check every day because we didn't know when it would start," my sister complained. From the end of the funeral until today, my mother had been watching nearby, hoping to participate in the inheritance discussions. I thought she should have just shown up at the funeral instead, since the inheritance discussion was scheduled as soon as possible after the funeral. "Because of what you said, my poor little daughter had to suffer. You're going to give us a fair amount, right?" my mother demanded. Even though they divorced and lived separately, the children still had the right to inherit. I had no intention of refusing that in the first place. My father's personal assets were not large enough to be distributed among the family. I can earn my own money by working, and my stepmother is still young enough to continue working. She plans to work for a while longer, so even if I gave my father's property to my biological mother, my stepmother wouldn't struggle financially. Besides, I didn't want any more disputes, so I gave up my claim to my father's inheritance. "What a stupid man," my mother sneered. "He made such a fuss about a simple affair and wanted a divorce." I agreed to the divorce because being with such a small-minded man made my own heart narrow too. Yeah, it wasn't our dad who dumped mom. It was mom who dumped our stingy dad. "Poor big sister for living with such a father," my sister added, ridiculing my deceased father. Laughing crudely, my sister joined in, disparaging my father as well. "It's pitiful that you were raised by a father who was dumped." Neither of them showed any empathy or understanding for the sadness and loss my father experienced after being betrayed. "You can say whatever you want about me, but please don't speak ill of our deceased father," I pleaded. "What? What's the traitor saying? You're the root of all evil," my mother shot back. "That's right, and what's with that plain look? You don't look like you're in your 20s. You look older than your mom. With that appearance, you probably don't have a boyfriend, right? If you can't attract a man, what's the point of being a woman? If you don't think so, then you're full of flaws as a woman," my sister mocked. After an intense argument, my mother and sister told me never to contact them again and stormed out. I couldn't feel anger or disappointment toward them, who wouldn't consider others' opinions and only insisted on their own. It was utter emptiness. In that moment, their existence was erased from my life. After they left, there was silence for a while, but someone coughed and snapped me back into reality. The inheritance was then divided solemnly. Years later, my stepmother inherited the house my father left, and I continued living there. I wasn't sure, but I believed she was thinking about me. Even though I was an adult, my stepmother tried to be a mother figure for me. Her support made me very happy, but then she became ill and was hospitalized. "I'm sorry I didn't ask you to live with me just so you could take care of me," she said. "I know, but even if we lived separately, I would have taken care of you if you were hospitalized, so don't worry," I replied. I visited the hospital to take care of my stepmother during breaks from work. I didn't want to have any regrets like I did when my father was ill. You could call it self-satisfaction. Her time was limited, so I wanted to spend as much of it with her as possible. One man supported me through all of this. Before my stepmother's illness was discovered, we had been discussing marriage, but right before we decided to get married, her illness was revealed. I asked to put the marriage on hold for a while, but my partner said it would be better to reassure my stepmother, and his presence became indispensable to me. At the right time, I introduced him to my stepmother. He told her, "I'm looking forward to living together with the three of us. He's a wonderful person. I have to make sure I see you in your wedding dress on behalf of your father too," she said, her greatest joy shining through. She lived longer than initially expected, but a few days after my wedding, she passed away, joining my father. My stepmother was wealthy and I inherited a large amount of money. 3 years later, with what my stepmother left behind, I was able to build a happy family. From the start of our marriage, my husband and I decided to continue working and live within our means, not relying on any inheritance. Today, as usual, I went to work and received a call from an unknown number on my personal cell phone. Assuming it was a sales call, I ignored it. However, the calls persisted, coming in every minute. Eventually, I answered at the end of the day and discovered it was my estranged sister. "Why didn't you come?" she demanded. "Come to what? What are you talking about?" I replied, confused. "How could you forget our mother's funeral?" she sobbed. "Our mother's funeral was 3 years ago," I said, bewildered. She paused before continuing angrily, "Oh, maybe your stepmother died too. I'm talking about our real mother. Calling someone you're not even related to mother is disgusting." I felt irritated but chose to overlook her attitude, recognizing that the loss of her mother must have been a tremendous shock to my sister. For me, my real mother was my stepmother, who had married a man with a child and became a mother to a middle school student overnight. I didn't fully grasp this until I had my own family. I think the period of nurturing a life within oneself is a time for a mother to develop self-awareness and commitment. Of course, I am aware that many people can build wonderful family relationships even without a blood connection, such as through adoption. However, becoming a mother to a middle schooler all of a sudden is certainly not an easy task, no matter how you look at it. When I consider my stepmother's efforts and anxieties, all I feel is gratitude. I am forever indebted to her, and she is the image of the mother I strive to be. Blood connections are trivial in reality. The so-called real mother my sister refers to never even looked at me. So when I hear the word mother, I think of my stepmother who raised me, not my birth mother. I genuinely believed she was talking about my stepmother. Finally understanding my sister's words, I replied indifferently, "Oh, I see." I could hear what sounded like her banging or stomping over the phone. What that indifferent attitude? The funeral is over. It's terrible not to attend your own relative's funeral. What a cold-blooded person, you must not have red blood in you. Although she made a valid point, my sister also didn't attend our relative's funeral. Moreover, our deceased father loved both my sister and me equally. I believe he was more affectionate than my mother. Not only did my birth mother and sister not attend my father's funeral, but they also took his inheritance and insulted and despised him. If you ask me, I think those two are the ones without red blood flowing in them. Indifferent. "Well, we're strangers, aren't we?" I said. "Ha! You interfered with the inheritance even though you didn't attend Dad's funeral, right? Weren't you the one who said never to contact you again? And I just found out about our mother's passing now, you know." After a brief silence, my sister uttered a small "ah." "I forgot I meant to inform you about the funeral." "Well, I'm glad you remembered. I'm going to renounce all the inheritance related to that mother, so you can do whatever you want with it," I said, hanging up the phone. However, my sister, perhaps lacking comprehension, contacted me again a few days later. "Help me, Katie. Seems her mother hinted at marriage to various men. Isn't that like marriage fraud? They're yelling at me to pay compensation if I don't want to be sued. I'm being yelled at a lot." "Well, just pay them. If I could, I wouldn't be calling you. Didn't you hear me say various men? It's not just one or two. Some of them seem pretty sketchy too." "That's tough, but remember you were the one who said never to contact you again. Furthermore, it should have been known that her mother was promiscuous with men since she cheated on her father while he was still alive. In fact, she didn't have just one affair. If it had been only one person, our father might have forgiven her, thinking it was just a momentary lapse of judgment. Only our father would know the truth. There might be a possibility that I couldn't accept my mother. You had multiple relationships as a mother. That's because my father tried to adopt my sister several times through a lawyer. But I was told that my sister didn't want to leave, so I gave up on that idea. My sister wanted to stay with our irresponsible mother, even though she saw her up close. Even if our mother had imprinted on her, my sister still wanted to be with her, twisting the memories we both shared. It's fair to say that not being able to leave even after becoming an adult is equally guilty. There's no room for sympathy here. And you were the one who called me a traitor all along. I don't need a sister who calls me a traitor. You were the one who declared us strangers first. I don't need you coming around now, acting all like family. It's a nuisance. Don't ever contact me again. We're strangers after all." I hung up the phone without checking my sister's reaction. I blocked her number and went back to the house where my family was waiting. Later, I received a call from my biological mother's relatives. I thought we were done, but they apologized for the rudeness my mother and sister had shown me, so I decided to hear them out. The relatives remembered how harshly my mom treated me and were shocked that she could shamelessly claim my father's inheritance after we had separated. They apologized profusely for allowing the visit during a time when my grief had not yet healed. But that's all in the past now. Next, they talked about my sister. Apparently, she's just as irresponsible with men as our mother. Ever since my sister came back, they had warned her numerous times that she would eventually suffer if she didn't change her ways. But instead of changing, my sister became just like our mother, and they could no longer control her. Mother got involved with bad men, and my sister was being forced into criminal activities. Feeling cornered, my sister was also dating multiple men at the same time, leading to several intense confrontations. Unable to handle it anymore, the relatives declared that they would cut off their relationship if their advice wasn't heeded. And then our mother died. As my sister is an adult, they decided to continue with cutting off their relationship. But right after our mother's funeral, another confrontation occurred. Since then, her whereabouts have been unknown. They advised me not to get involved with her anymore. I didn't plan on it anyway. However, I can't help but feel sorry for her, as there might be some room for sympathy regarding the criminal activities she was forced into. But there must have been a way for her to atone. If she didn't take that path, then I guess it's her own fault. That's what I decided to think. After hanging up the phone, I heard the sound of my husband and children laughing happily in another room. I want to protect this family, so I decided to live my life using my biological mother and sister as negative examples. "Wake up, please." My husband always had a gentle face, even while sleeping. In his casket, it seemed like he would wake up any moment if I called out to him. "Well, off I go," he had said cheerfully to me and our daughter before leaving on a business trip 2 days ago. I never imagined that would be the last time I heard his voice. He took his own life. No matter how much I called out, my husband, now cold as ice, wouldn't respond. Despite all this, I found it hard to believe what had happened. Then, I noticed a single photo placed on my husband's chest. It was a family photo I didn't remember putting there. Who could have placed this photo here? Intrigued, I picked up the photo and flipped it over. It read, "Run away now." Chills ran down my spine as I turned around and locked eyes with my mother-in-law, who was looking at me with a cold gaze. I had no idea of the nightmares that awaited me. My name is Bella. I'm 32 years old. Both my parents passed away in a car accident when I was still in college, leaving me all alone in this world. The grief was unbearable, but John, my then boyfriend, supported me, and we got married shortly after graduating. We were living happily with our 8-year-old daughter, Hannah. My in-laws consisted of my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. My father-in-law had passed away from a sudden heart attack a year ago, surprising everyone in the family. My in-laws were affluent and ran a business, so we were never in a financial bind. My father-in-law had intended for his kind and considerate younger brother, who had business acumen, to take over as CEO. However, he passed away suddenly before this could happen. Ultimately, the eldest son, my brother-in-law, took over. Father wanted me to take over, but I couldn't possibly do that over my older brother. "I'll support him," my husband had said. He respected his brother deeply and had no objection to giving up the position of CEO. My brother-in-law was very kind to me and often spoke to me in a friendly manner. However, I didn't have much interaction with my mother-in-law, whom I found somewhat difficult. When I just got married, my mother-in-law was very kind to me and would cook with me, saying, "I don't have a daughter, so I love spending time with you like this." However, she suddenly turned cold after my father-in-law passed away. She turned cold to both me and my husband and even avoided making any eye contact with us. I was perplexed. Even towards Hannah, who used to dote on her as her first grandchild, she would glare and shut her down even when Hannah approached her, calling grandma. "She used to be such a sweet person before," said my upset husband. I felt very sorry for him. "Something's off about Mom. She's glaring at me as if I'm her enemy. Does she think we're after her assets? Or could she be ill or something?" My husband wondered. He had been thinking deeply about his mother's change in behavior but couldn't come up with any reason. In fact, we first noticed her change during my father-in-law's one-week memorial service when we were staying at her house. Exhausted from the memorial service, we slept soundly, but when we woke up in the morning, we noticed that the bag with our change of clothes we had left in the room was missing. "Could it be a burglar?" I asked. "No, it's strange that only our bag is missing. Let's look for it, my husband replied. While we were searching, we saw smoke rising from the backyard through the window. In disbelief, we went to check and found our belongings being burned. There was my mother-in-law. Mom, you didn't do this, did you? Mother-in-law, please answer us. My mother-in-law said nothing. Her eyes were wide open, her lips pale white, and her hands were shaking. She seemed scared. Mom, why did you do this? What is it about us that you don't like? John asked, confused by her silence. He leaned closer to her and spoke gently. You're not worried about us going after your assets, are you? I'm not after your assets. You can rest easy. We care about you, mother-in-law. Despite her earnest appeals, she coldly declared, Get out of here, both of you, and don't come back. Baffled, we hurriedly left her house and have since become estranged, barely visiting for the past year. As much as it pained us, we felt like we couldn't reach mother-in-law, who clearly despised us. Then, one day, we received a message from my brother-in-law about the first anniversary memorial service for my father-in-law. All the relatives were gathering, so we decided to go, but my mother-in-law remained as cold as ever. Seeing this seemed to make John think more frequently. What's the matter, John? Are you worried about mother-in-law? I asked. Huh? Oh, it's nothing. If there's anything I can do for you, just tell me, I said. Don't worry about it, Bella. You don't need to worry about anything, he replied, gently stroking my cheek. His kind smile brought me great relief and soothed my feelings. About a month passed after that. Well, I'm off, he said as he left for his business trip, cheerfully greeting me and our daughter Hannah, as usual. But he quickly returned, saying, I forgot to give you this, and handed me a cute little charm. This will surely protect you, he said with his gentle smile. I thought to myself how truly grateful I was to be married to him. However, a shocking event occurred the very next day. John had taken his own life. His car was found parked on a mountain road near my parents' house in Colorado. Inside the car, he was frothing at the mouth, taking his last breaths. Although he had told me he was on a business trip, his company said there were no trips scheduled that day. Moreover, I was told that just before his death, he had called my brother-in-law and whispered, I can't go on living. It has become too painful. I'm sorry. I tried to stop him, but it turned out like this. My brother-in-law repeatedly apologized to me. According to the police, traces of a poisonous plant were found in his stomach. They said that this plant grows naturally in the mountains and can be easily obtained with a little knowledge. In the end, given my brother-in-law's testimony, it was concluded that John had likely consumed it to end his own life. I bitterly blamed myself for not noticing his pain and having no clue why this happened. In front of my husband's body, I was about to collapse, but my brother-in-law supported me. Stay strong, Bella. This is hard for me too. I wish I had been more understanding of John's feelings. Why? Why did this happen? I cried, holding on to Hannah, who was also crying. But my mother-in-law was glaring at us with a pale face, showing no tears. While I was overwhelmed with grief, my brother-in-law and colleagues from the company proceeded with the funeral arrangements. Please wake up, I whispered on the day of the funeral. My husband John lay peacefully in the casket with his usual gentle expression. It seemed as if he would wake up any moment if I called out to him. As I clung to my husband, tears streamed down my cheeks. Then I noticed it. A single photo was placed on John's chest. Who could have placed this photo here? Curious, I picked up the photo to find that the part of the family photo showing John's face had been slashed mercilessly with a cutter. On the back of the photo was the phrase, "Run away now, S." What does this mean? Who could this message be directed to? As shivers ran down my spine, I turned around and locked eyes with my mother-in-law, who was glaring at me with icy eyes. Could it be her? When I stared back, she hurriedly averted her gaze. At that moment, I felt my mother-in-law knew something. So I discreetly slipped the photo into the pocket of my mourning dress without anyone noticing. After the funeral, once things had calmed down a bit, I started to think again about the photo. I still didn't know who had put the photo in the casket. I thought this S in the message might be someone's initial. The only person I could think of with a name starting with S was Scarlett, my mother-in-law. I always found it hard to believe that John would take his own life and leave me and our daughter Hannah behind. I hoped to find any reason, however small. That's why I decided to bravely visit my mother-in-law. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with the same cold expression. Unfortunately, my brother-in-law was at work and wasn't home, so it was just the two of us. What brings you here all of a sudden? She asked. Well, I was hoping to find out more about why John passed away. I thought there might be some clue here at his childhood home, I replied, lying on the spot because I didn't have the courage to confront her directly. As I looked for a topic of conversation, I glanced at the large bookshelf that covered one wall of the living room. The bookshelf, a product of the book-loving family, was filled with novels, encyclopedias, and dictionaries. There were also a few books that John had read during his student days. I couldn't help but pick up a few out of nostalgia. Each book had a stamp at the end of every page to indicate who it belonged to. Next to John's initial J was a small cuddling cat that was so like him, and a smile escaped my lips. However, I could feel the cold stare of my mother-in-law on my back as I continued to flip through the books. Suddenly, I noticed a book that still had a cover on it. Picking it up, I saw it was a book on poisonous plants. There were several post-it notes in it, and when I opened one, it was about the poisonous plant that my husband had used. At the last page of the book, there was also a stamp of ownership. "Mother-in-law, what is the meaning of this?" I asked. She burst into tears. "I am the one to blame. Forgive me." The truth, she confessed, was shocking. "Please tell the police," I said. "Yes, I understand," she replied, and so I reported it to the police. Just then, my brother-in-law returned home, unaware of the situation. Noticing the sorrowful look on my mother-in-law's face, he asked with a worried expression, "What happened? Even Bella's here. Did something happen?" "I just wanted to discuss my husband with my mother-in-law," I said. "I see. Losing him must have been hard for you. Are you feeling a little better now, Bella?" he asked. As I mumbled and looked down, unable to tell him the truth, he began to speak something unexpected. "I know it's not the right time to say this, but I've always had feelings for you, Bella. I also think Hannah is adorable. Would you consider remarrying me?" he asked. I was surprised by his sudden revelation. I never expected my brother-in-law to have such feelings for me. "Thank you, brother-in-law, but I can't think about such a thing right now." "Yeah, I understand," he replied, scratching his head shyly. I handed him the photograph. When he saw the photo of my husband's face slashed and the words "Run away now" on the back, he turned pale and gasped. "This was found inside my husband's coffin. Who could do such a thing? It seems like someone at the funeral might know who harmed my husband," I said. "Hold on a minute. John took his own life, so there's no culprit," he said, bewildered, his eyes darting restlessly. "But in my dreams, my husband screams, 'I've been duped by that guy. I hate him,'" I said. His eyes widened at my words, staring at me with a shocked expression. "Also, I found this in the bookshelf in the living room," I continued, showing him the book about poisonous plants. I pointed to the owner's bookplate, which read my brother-in-law's name, Ken. "What are you trying to say? Are you implying that I murdered my brother?" he asked. I didn't answer his question and instead continued my story. My mother-in-law, who had been silent and looking down beside me, was holding her breath and watching how things were unfolding. "And take a look at this," I said, pulling out the little charm my husband had given me. Inside, there was a letter. It read, "My brother killed our father with a poisonous plant." I had been clutching the charm throughout John's funeral and realized there was something inside it only later. "This isn't valid evidence," my brother-in-law scoffed. "Then what about this?" I pulled out my phone and played a video. It showed a conversation between my husband and my brother-in-law. In the video, my brother-in-law admitted that he took their father's life on purpose. He even said, "I'm not coming after your family. I will turn myself in to the police." My husband had secretly set up a camera in their parents' house, as mentioned in the letter he left for me. "You confessed your crime to my husband, then reassured him you'd turn yourself in, only to take his life using the same poisonous plant, didn't you? John trusted you until the very end. Why did you do such a thing?" I pressed him. My brother-in-law's expression shifted from gentle to terrifying as he glared at me, clicking his tongue in frustration. At that moment, my mother-in-law burst into tears, sobbing out loud, "Why? Why such a cruel thing?" She had just confessed everything to me. The brothers had been very close during their childhood, but over time, my brother-in-law grew envious of his talented younger brother and started messing with him through petty pranks like hiding and damaging his possessions. Aware of this, my in-laws disciplined my brother-in-law strictly, but John never blamed him and continued to admire him. This disheartened my mother-in-law. After my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law found a book about poisonous plants while cleaning the bookshelf. Although my husband was diagnosed with a heart attack, he had never been warned of any heart issues in his previous medical checkups. She suspected something wasn't right and noticed a bookmark in the book detailing symptoms similar to those my husband had before he passed away. She also found a photo of John's face slashed with a box cutter hidden within the pages of the book. Without concrete evidence and knowing my brother-in-law wouldn't admit to anything, my mother-in-law chose not to confront him. During my father-in-law's memorial service, she was deeply shaken to find my brother-in-law burning our bags to keep us away from the family home. She explained this in a pained voice, her face lined with worry. Even though we stopped visiting their home, my mother-in-law noticed my brother-in-law becoming more and more grim, murmuring to himself, "I have to do something about John." She tried to warn me about it at my husband's first memorial by passing the message to run away now, using the photo. She also whispered to John that Ken might have killed their father, but it backfired. Had my husband not known, he probably wouldn't have gone to meet my brother-in-law, and things wouldn't have turned out this way. My mother-in-law regretted and blamed herself for everything. I couldn't respond to her words. It's all because our father decided not to let me take over the company. But John always said he couldn't become president by pushing you aside. Like I care. Both your father and John loved you. You didn't have to go this far. What's the point now? The parents who only doted on my younger brother are to blame, and so is the good boy, he sneered. As I stood there, heartbroken and dismayed, the weight of the family's hidden resentments and tragedies pressed down on me. It's all your fault, John, my brother-in-law spat, his defiant expression sending chills down my spine. How dare you take away my dear husband? I will never forgive you. Shut up. If you hadn't meddled, I might have even made you my wife, he retorted. Suddenly, my enraged brother-in-law pulled out a knife he had been hiding and started coming at me. I cried out for help and tried to escape, but he was quick and soon stood right in front of me. Cornered and facing a raised knife, I instinctively closed my eyes. At that moment, a loud thud hit. Someone had jumped in to protect me. It was my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, are you okay? I asked, seeing blood seeping from her arm. We're missing? She held her wounded arm. Ken, please stop doing these awful things. Please turn yourself in. Shut up. Both of you just have to disappear, he shouted. You became the CEO you always wanted to be. Why would you go this far? I asked, desperate for answers. I need money, he snarled. Having taken over the company without any managerial talent, my brother-in-law had accrued substantial debt within a year. He was now in desperate need of money and had even taken out a high-value life insurance policy on my husband. It's funny. John believed me easily when I said I was going to turn myself in. He laughed menacingly. I felt intense revulsion at his demeanor. But John still wanted to save you. Why didn't you understand that? It's all my parents' fault for favoring John over me, he screamed. At that moment, the police who had been called earlier arrived. My brother-in-law struggled until the end, pleading, I did nothing wrong. Forgive me. Overlook this. You deserve to go to hell. I snapped. My brother-in-law gasped, finally calming down as he was taken away by the police. Fortunately, my mother-in-law's injury was not serious. In the end, my brother-in-law showed no signs of remorse and will likely remain behind bars. I am now living with my mother-in-law at her place. She has returned to her old self and is loving towards my daughter Hannah. We were happily living together, and the letter in the charm had more to it. Bella, you are my treasure. I love you always. Embracing my husband's feelings, I have decided to keep living, cherishing the love we shared.